Oh, hey everybody. My voice is kind of shot right now. Radiation really put it to me a little bit. But I'm still swinging them good. Start chemo tomorrow. But we'll talk about fun times. Let's talk about John Cook's version of Saturn theory. It's quite interesting. I'll talk to you later.
A historical synopsis of Saturnian cosmology from John Cook's website, saturniancosmology.org. There will be a link in the description. It gets pretty deep. The chapters of this site will propose that the biology of our planet, our culture, our psychology, and our very existence are the result of a series of incidents arising from the interaction between Earth and other planets within the solar system, most notably Saturn. The biology of Earth is such that a complete accident, and so utterly unlike it, will not have ever been duplicated anywhere at any time among the billions of other star systems. But here on Earth, all of it, especially the rise of complex species since the Cambrian period 560 million years ago, can be attributed to a series of cataclysmic plasma strikes by Saturn, each of a very long duration. Biologists claim 10,000 years for the extinction events. My original estimate was 15,000 years. As hominids, we survived the last externally induced extinction event, which gave rise to 8 competing subspecies over the course of the last 3 million years. Our only contribution to our distinction from other animals was the invention 10,000 years ago of language and its subsequent cultural transmission that set the stage for further development of our humanity. Much later on, and much closer to our time, subjective consciousness. It all started very long ago, at one time, and from its genesis, Earth was a planet in orbit around Saturn, a brown dwarf star, toward the end of the Precambrian, 600 million years ago. The Saturnian system intersected with the solar system. Saturn was swept around the sun and back into deep space, to return at regular 26 to 27 million year intervals over the course of time. Some of the satellites, planets of Saturn, were wrenched from their orbits around Saturn to end up revolving around the sun instead. The Earth likely became a solar system planet at the end of the Permian 250 million years ago. From 600 million years ago, Saturn kept entering the solar system regularly to disturb its lost satellites, now circling the sun. At about 3 million years ago, Saturn likely had a run-in with Jupiter, a solar system planet at that time, orbiting the sun at a distance probably somewhat less than the Earth's orbit today. The orbital period of Saturn was significantly reduced as a result. During the last 3 million year period, Saturn started scavenging its lost satellites, and perhaps solar system planets, all in orbit close to the sun. The possibility of a captured planet again orbiting Saturn at its equator is virtually nil. Instead, the scavenged planets ended up in superpolar or subpolar locations, the only locations which seem to be dynamically stable. Because Saturn had come in from outside of the solar system, and most likely was a star originally, it would have been at a very high positive charge level, distinct from the solar system planets. Solar system planets would have been attracted to Saturn when Saturn entered the solar system, rather than be repelled, as would be the case of two planets with nearly equal values of charge. Saturn, with its stack of captured planets, was seen by hominids, Homo erectus, and recorded in the shapes of artifacts in the Paleolithic of about 2 million years ago, and by humans, Homo sapiens, as carved images in the Upper Paleolithic from 30,000 BC, and by the hundreds of millions during the early Neolithic, 10,000 to 3,000 BC, when the stack of planets was much more frequently seen. At about 10,900 BC, Earth, at that time a planet of the Sun, made an electric field contact with Saturn, causing 1,500 years of darkness. Shadow on Earth. The period of darkness is recognized by many of the world's creation myths, and was recorded in the illustrated graphic books of Mesoamerica, references to which are made in colonial period documents. Climatologically, the period is identified today as the Younger Dryas, when for some 1,500 years Earth got as cold as it had ever been. Over the next 7,000 years, the orbit of Earth, apparently equal to the orbit of Saturn at that time, but below Saturn, progressively moved laterally to have Earth's orbital path eventually travel below the center of Saturn. Thus, between 10,900 BC and 3147 BC, Earth was part of a strange configuration of stacked planets, a condition which provided long summers and a mild climate in the northern hemisphere. Planets dominated by the giant form of Saturn stood above the north horizon and close to Earth, but measured in millions of miles, and were taken by humans to be gods, who supported them and for whose benefit they labored at agriculture and conducted trade. Initially, during a 1,500-year period after 10,900 BC, when the cold of the Younger Dryas set in, and long before Saturn was clearly seen, 3 fiercely lighted ball plasmoids were seen far south of Earth. Below the South Pole, between about 10,900 BC and 8347 BC, these connected to Saturn in the north via strands of brilliant arcs of electrons. Forms of various shapes ran south over these electron lines, traveling toward the 3 plasmoids. The moving shapes were taken to be dead animals and dead humans. The objects in the sky became the basis for all original religions and a good deal of mythology throughout the world, for they persisted in showing nightly and seasonally over the course of 2,500 years to 8347 BC, although only for 3 periods of hundreds of years. For the people of Mesoamerica, the year 8347 BC, when the last of the plasmoids extinguished after 2,500 years, was the end of their first tally of years, which accounted for the first creation. We know only a little about these ball plasmoids from obscure mythological references, and we would still not know very much if it had not been for an investigation undertaken by a team led by Anthony Peratt of Los Alamos National Labs, of some 4 million petroglyphs worldwide, carved high up on mountainsides facing in all directions, but always with a clear view toward the south. That study, published in the journal IEEE Transactions on Plasma Science in 2003, was an absolutely astounding revelation. More on that in a later chapter. In 4077 BC, Saturn dropped its coma. This had been the chaos before creation, which had lasted some 7,000 years. It had obscured Saturn and its companion satellites. Saturn went nova. It switched to arc mode. In a mass expulsion, Saturn produced its rings and a new satellite, Venus, and perhaps another. That's interesting. So they're saying that Venus came from Saturn and not Jupiter, like Velikovsky does. Okay. And Saturn lit up more brilliantly than the Sun. To the humans of Earth, who had not clearly seen the real Sun for thousands of years, because of the shadow of the younger Dryas, followed by the obscurity of the enclosing plasmasphere of Saturn. This was the start of creation, start of time, and the first showing of the land and its resident gods, the satellites of Saturn. Saturn was universally called the Sun throughout the world. In Central America, the Popol Vuh, written circa AD 1600, from much older records, recounts, like a man was the sun when it showed itself. It showed itself when it was born and remained fixed in the sky like a mirror. Certainly it was not the same sun which we see. It is said in their old tales. In arc mode, Saturn would have lost its glow mode coma, but it apparently retained a plasma stream connection to Earth. The sun, and the real Sun, lighted part of the edge of Saturn in a crescent, which revolved around Saturn on a daily basis, visually caused by a daily rotation of Earth below Saturn. This stack of planets consisted from top to bottom of Uranus, on its side as today, and Neptune, both hidden by Saturn below them, known in Mesoamerica from earlier times. I suspect that these three planets had been seen together for perhaps 2 million years, initially by Homo erectus. Below Saturn, the following were located from top to bottom. Mercury joined the group in about 14,000 BC. Mars, resident probably since at least 30,000 BC or earlier, and Earth joined the group after 10,900 BC. In 3147 BC, this configuration of standing planets broke apart, with three large planets moving far away from the Sun, and Earth, and Venus, released to overlapping inner orbits. The breakup produced a stupendous flood of the waters, which had been held at the South Polar region due to the gravitational attraction of Saturn for some 7,000 years. The water held at the South Pole was due to the lifting up of the Earth's crust in the Arctic and the sinking toward the Earth's interior in the Antarctic. Flood stories are ubiquitous, found in over 500 independent myths, all with the same coherent details. The survivors included people far inland and those living already on mountain slopes, and apparently the people of the Nile Delta and northern Mesopotamia. The only recourse to a livelihood for many of the survivors was agriculture, which soon sprang up simultaneously in 6 unconnected regions of Earth. The breakup was caused by Jupiter, which had circled the Sun as an inner planet up to that time. Jupiter was subsequently seen receding in the skies, surrounded by a coma visually 3 times larger than the diameter of the Moon today. Below the south pole of Jupiter extended a gigantic plasma outpouring, making it look like Jupiter was resting on a mountain. It was green initially. Above the planet were much smaller horn-like extensions. The whole of this looked like a person in a mantle, but was also identified as the bowl of heaven. Jupiter was taken as the new god, called the Younger. Jupiter retained its massive lower outpouring until it entered the asteroid belt in about 2860 BC, after which the coma reduced in size and changed its shape. After 3070 BC, Mars and Mercury, which had remained in their positions below Saturn, were released when Saturn entered the asteroid belt. The two planets crossed Earth's orbit for about 300 years, overriding the Earth's orbit close to Earth on a 30-year or 15-year average intervals. At those times, Mars was at times brought into plasma contact with Earth, looking like a squat mountain which circled the Earth. The visual effect of the rotation of Earth, with Saturn and Jupiter both disappearing into the ecliptic. Mars was held to be the god in charge of Earth. Horus of the Egyptians. This lasted till about 2750 BC or 2700 BC, after which the irregular visits of Mars ended its elliptical orbit, perhaps rotating away from Earth, an apocidal procession. In the next century, people throughout the world start building pyramids in imitation of the disappeared mountain of Mars, all within 100 years of each other. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, England, China, and the Andes of South America, and many other locations such as Greece and the Balkans, as has been discovered in recent years, although not validated. We have recorded histories of these celestial events, especially in Mesoamerica. There are accurate descriptions of the rings and the number of satellites of Saturn, the cloud bands and satellites of Jupiter, and the scarred surface and satellites of Mars, all dating from antiquity, spanning cultures worldwide. The Egyptians produced schematic images of the original configuration of Saturn and the satellite planets below, and have a record of early close passes by Mars. Mesopotamians also produced images of planets, graphically showing, for example, all the satellites of Jupiter. The Maya, from Olmec sources, have an undated record of the planetary movements from long before 3147 BC, and a dated record of later events which matches what can be gleaned from Eastern Mediterranean sources. The Aztecs produced graphic images of these planets, although anthropomorphized to gods and produced very late. South Sea Islanders have similar records of rings of Saturn. India has similar recollection of these events extending over millions of lines of poetry. The Quiche, Maya, Popol Vuh, and pages of the Maya books of the Chilombalam makes casual reference to the period of 13,000 years ago. After the near collision of Saturn and Jupiter in 3147 BC, both Saturn and Jupiter began moving in slow spiral orbits away from the Sun toward the asteroid belt, probably 10,900 BC. One page of the Chilombalam records 7 appearances of the Saturnian planets as far back as perhaps 40,000 years, which can be correlated with atmospheric carbon-14 records dating from 50,000 BP. Over the next 2,500 years, 3147 BC to 685 BC, the inner planets interfered with Earth at intervals, although very infrequently. There were 4 major additional incidents. The damage often was localized in latitude, although, for example, a continuous lightning strike might have encircled the globe in circa 1492 BC, and certainly repeatedly in the 8th and 7th century BC. As recalled by nearly all peoples on all continents, the most terrifying incident, however, happened in 2349 BC. Saturn, with the planets Mars and Mercury still in a polar alignment below, entered the asteroid belt in 3067 BC. The gravitational and electrical effects of entering the asteroid belt released Mars and Mercury from below Saturn, and they started moving in highly elliptical orbits.
These orbits brought both planets back through the asteroid belt at their aphelions, and Mars and Mercury pulled swarms of objects of various sizes from the belt back with them through the inner solar system.
These objects were known as Maruts, or the Terrible Ones, and manifested as comets and meteorites that terrorized the Earth's population for many centuries to come.
When in alignment with Venus, 20 million miles away at the time, 32,200,000 kilometers, produced an Earth shock in the northern hemisphere, tilting the Earth's axis away from the Sun temporarily and tilting up the equatorial rings of the Earth. Earth at one time had equatorial rings. This was followed perhaps 6 hours later by the arrival of a massive disconnected plasmoid lightning bolt from Venus, which hit the rings almost broadside, followed somewhat later by lesser bolts recorded in Mesoamerica and China. The electric contact with Venus turned the equatorial rings blood red and caused the destruction of the rings. Lightning bolts arc up to the rings from the Earth's ionosphere layers and the lower equatorial plasma toroid, the Van Allen belt. The sky bled for 3 days. and only a single ring remained. Dust continued to rain down for the next 4,000 years until AD 1600. The cleared southern skies, previously obscured by the Earth's rings, revealed a multitude of stars for the first time, most notably the Pleiades, located directly south at midnight, 2 nights after the equinox. The equatorial plasma toroid would have also arced to the surface of Earth, producing months of torrential rains. To humanity, the sea of the Earth's equatorial rings in the south sky, the EBSU, had collapsed to Earth, and the event was almost everywhere understood as a second flood of stupendous proportion. The Bible recalls this event as the flood of Noah, but to most peoples, the blood seen in the sky suggested the wholesale slaughter of humanity, and any number of raging goddesses or dragons were assigned to this event in mythology worldwide. Kali, Tiamat, Manath, Sekhmet, Hathor, and much later, Beowulf's Grendel. After 2.5 days, Jupiter appeared again with its previous giant coma and lower mantle, again understood as a mountain, as if risen from the dead. In fact, the rise of the equatorial in the sky made it look as if Jupiter rose up out of the cave previously seen as the shadow of the Earth on the rings. The cave-shaped shadow opened up as the Earth regained its normal inclination, and Jupiter rose out of this to a location above it. Jupiter had stopped the dragon from killing additional humans. The event itself remains commemorated as the Day of the Dead, which is why they wear Halloween masks on Halloween. It's so that the spirits don't recognize them, the ones that might want revenge. I believe that's what that's about. And is almost universally associated with the culmination of the Pleiades in autumn. Echoes of the fall of the rings and the surrounding circumstances continued to resound in mythology and, to this day, in the theologies and practices of many religions, especially the resurrection of Jupiter on the third day. Many nations also date the start of all sensible history and their calendars from this event. Strangely, this event is simply not noted by any of the catastrophists. Even Velikovsky remained unaware of it. Interesting. 800 years later, in 1492 BC, Venus again made an electric contact with Earth, causing a crushing repulsive blow in the east central Pacific. Pacific Islands were wiped clean of any trace of humans, except for the petroglyphs carved on every island thousands of years earlier. Coastal South America and Central America were inundated with water, leaving seawater traces in lakes high up in the Andes, and possibly causing a sudden rise in the coastal range of the Andes by thousands of feet. The blow was followed by an electric arc traveling through the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, and part of India, following a path of increasingly higher latitude into the Mediterranean as the Earth's axis angled back toward the sun. Moses made his escape from Egypt during the turmoil. The event is recalled in mythology as the attack of the monster Typhon, who is struck down by Zeus. The major result of the contact was a 30% increase in the orbit of the Earth. The year went from 273 days to 360 days. Venus probably came no closer than 10 million miles. In this instance, 16 million kilometers. Something else was initiated at this time. The movement of tribes away from devastated areas and failing climates into new regions happened after 1492 BC. Tribes of Central Asia entered India, Anatolia, and Greece. Tribes from Asia Minor settled in Italy, as well as at later dates also. People everywhere met strangers and had to cope with new living conditions. This resulted in an expansion of our imagination as a way of coping with these changes. The development of subjective consciousness. Before this time, there was little need to deal with change. The people of Egypt and Mesopotamia, for whom we have records, have remained stagnant in the way of life of their forebears for thousands upon thousands of years. The development of subjective consciousness, as opposed to mere consciousness, was a cultural innovation and a major change which made us humans. Subjective consciousness came to be taught to children by parents, exactly like language is taught. The teaching of subjective consciousness, like the teaching of language, can be readily observed today. Note 5. Another 700 years later, 806 BC to 687 BC, Mars closed in on Earth with repeated electric arc contact at 15-year intervals. A major Earth shock in 747 BC and a minor shock in 686 BC, this last caused by Mercury.
Earlier, Mars also interfered with Earth in a similar fashion at the close of the early Bronze Age, 1935 to circa 1700 BC, which includes the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Mars came close, perhaps within 40,000 miles of Earth. The interactions, as a result, were completely different from the long-distance shock due to Venus. The destructions of the 8th and 7th century BC were spread over long stretches from Central Asia to the Western Mediterranean, and through to Mexico and southern United States, from the Persian Plateau to Greece, in swaths measuring more than 600 miles wide. Hilltop citadels were destroyed by quake-like convulsions, much more extensive than any earthquake, and by massive lightning strikes. Cities and citadels were buried under yards of carbonized material mixed with soil. The soil and burned forests were dropped whenever the traveling lightning bolt paused at a hilltop. Oh, that's pretty crazy. I mean, this lightning bolt traveling around, just going anywhere. These simultaneous destructions have been noted in the archaeological record and include the events of the 8th and 7th century as well as 1935 BC. De Grazia estimates that only 2.5% of the original population of 200 million of the Mediterranean region survived. Bolsena, a city in Italy, was obliterated by a lightning bolt measuring more than 5 miles, 8 kilometers in diameter. If we are to believe Pliny, who presents this from older Etruscan sources, the circular lake at Bolsena is larger than any volcanic caldera. Mars became the next sky god to set a tone for human conduct lasting this day. The destructions of the 8th and 7th century BC obliterated the coastal areas of Greece and coastal Anatolia. The remnant population turned to raiding and became the pirates celebrated in the Iliad as the Egyptian people of the sea. The Iliad reveals that these were no sailors. Warfare and the extraction of tribute also became a way of life for the Assyrians, who plundered from Elam to Egypt. The change in humanity, however, which suddenly brought people up to our current expectations, was an event which happened early in the 7th century BC. At 685 BC, Venus and Mercury blazed as bright as the sun and were seen in the daytime skies, with the sun for 40 days, starting on June 15th. The event was probably an extraordinary plasma outpouring by the sun, brought on by a sudden relocation of Mercury to within the orbit of Venus in the previous year. In July 685 BC, actually the astronomical year minus 685, corrected from 680 BC, Julian in the Eastern Mediterranean chronology. Okay, so that's what the minus is for. It's different. It's astronomical. Okay. Jupiter also erupted in a coma in response to the sun's increased output of plasma, and on July 14th sent a return lightning stroke, a plasmoid bolt headed for the sun. It arrived at the sun on July 25th. The plasmoid, which passed by the Earth at a distance of 30 million miles, 48 million kilometers, was seen in foreshortened form by Asia and Europe. How about that Jupiter taking a swing at the sun? And is depicted in sculptures and illustrations and even on coins. Mediterranean nations thought that Venus or Mercury was struck, the bolt from Zeus which toppled Phaethon from the sun's chariot. Mesoamerica saw the plasmoid at full length as it passed by in the daytime. That would be wild to see something like that, and depicted it correspondingly differently. Their understanding was that Mars was struck. It was called the bundle of flame. Among the Maya, to China this was the celestial dragon, the traditional form of which matches the structure of a plasmoid lightning bolt. Note 6. One could spend a lot of hours on this website here with this. This is amazing. Got a little bit more to go here.
As experienced by Earth, the after effect of the 40 days of extreme solar activity was the relocation of the polar axis from Ursa Major to near Ursa Minor, and the delay of spring by some 15 days. In effect, changing the inclination of the polar axis, which is equivalent to rotating the dome of the stars. A new equinox was suddenly established, the aphelion of the Earth's orbit, the location furthest from the Sun, changed, and 120 years of interference by Mars and Mercury came to a sudden halt. It appeared to many that Jupiter, the historical supreme god of antiquity, had again saved mankind from destruction. The change in aphelion had resulted in a cessation of further interactions with Mars. In 670 BC, the Earth's orbit became nearly circular, for unknown reasons, and the Earth was in fact completely removed from any future interference by any of the inner planets. It's probably the Sun's magnetic sphere, I'd imagine. Within 100 years of this event, we see the simultaneous rise of philosophical studies, much as we understand them today, in China, India, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, North Africa, and Rome, well before there was any cultural transmission before the more distant regions on the list. In this list, it appeared to many as if a far greater power beyond the dome of the stars had moved the stars and planets and restarted the universe. For many years of the philosophers, the causes for natural phenomena were now sought elsewhere than in the whims of old planetary gods. With the realization of the existence of a power beyond the planets and stars, we also see the sudden rise of all the modern religions within the span of 100 years. Taoism and Confucianism in China, Jainism and Buddhism in India, with its subsequent influence on Hinduism, Zoroastrianism in Persia, with its influence on Judaism, Mithraism, Christianity, and eventually on Islam. Similar changes seem to be attested to in Mesoamerica, probably dating from 600 BC. Could all this really have happened? Religions have attempted to explain all of it, initially as narrations of the observed events, eventually as metaphors of spiritual states. Science, on the other hand, has spent the last 200 years denying that anything at all ever happened. But look at the histories, what we call myths, of people from regions as diverse as China, Mesopotamia, and Mesoamerica, will reveal that they are in complete agreement with each other. Add to these various myths of the people of India, South America, Africa, Greece, and thousands of others, and a consistent picture of the past emerges, which is not what science tells us. Or fly over regions, for example, of the western United States, and you will soon be convinced that the waves of hills, the conical dumps of wind-borne soil, the distorted folded mountains, the widely varied landscape cannot possibly be the result of eons of slow movement and metamorphosis of the Earth's crust. The surface of the Earth appears to have been battered and racked convulsively, and widely varied landscape and recently. Except for geology, which I will not really touch on, the remaining chapters will fill in the details and broaden the scope. 4 major events. The 4 events are the end of the age of the gods and the worldwide flood of 3147 BC, the fall of the Apsu, known as the flood of Noah, the blood in the sky, the resurrection of Jupiter, and the first appearance of the Pleiades, 2349 BC, the defeat of Typhon and the exodus of Moses from Egypt in 1492 BC, and the blazing of Venus and Mercury and the thunderbolt of Jupiter, which toppled Phaethon in 685 BC. The last few chapters present an excursion into the site plans and iconography of Mesoamerica from about 2000 BC. In these last chapters, you will find that the more closely detailed findings from Mesoamerica will match and often exceed the information available from the Eastern Mediterranean.
In 1946, Immanuel Velikovsky wrote a short book, or a publication, and he titled it Cosmos Without Gravitation: Attraction, Repulsion, and Electromagnetic Circumduction in the Solar System. That was the whole title. A synopsis by Immanuel Velikovsky. I thought it might be interesting for us to go over some of the things that he writes about in 1946. It'd be interesting to compare them to what we know today and see if what he's saying is all that unrealistic. The contents are: number one, phenomena not in accord with the theory of gravitation. 2, attraction between two atoms, inertia, attraction of bodies toward the Earth. The time of descent and of ascent, a pendulum. The effect of charge on the weight of a body. 3, attraction, repulsion, and electromagnetic circumduction in the solar system. And 4, the anomaly of Mercury and other phenomena explained. Number 1. The fundamental theory of this paper is gravitation and electromagnetic phenomena. Gravitation is an electromagnetic phenomenon. There is no primary motion inherent in planets and satellites. Electric attraction, repulsion, and electromagnetic circumduction govern their movement. The moon does not fall attracted to the Earth from an assumed inertial motion along a straight line, nor is the phenomenon of objects falling in the terrestrial atmosphere.
Comparable with the falling effect in the movement of the moon, a conjecture which is the basic element of the Newtonian theory of gravitation. Aside from several important facts discovered in the study of cosmic upheavals, which are not illuminated here and only enumerated at the end of this paper, and which are discussed at length in a work of research entitled Worlds in Collision, now being prepared for publication. The following facts are incompatible with the theory of gravitation. Number 1. The ingredients of the air. Oxygen, nitrogen, argon, and other gases, though not in a compound but in a mixture, are found in equal proportions at various levels of the atmosphere, despite great differences in specific weights. The explanation accepted in science is this: swift winds keep the gases thoroughly mixed so that, except for water vapor, the composition of the atmosphere is the same throughout the troposphere, to a high degree of approximation. This explanation cannot be true. If it were true, then the moment the wind subsides, the nitrogen in accordance with its gravity or specific weight. But nothing of the kind happens. When some aviators expressed the belief that pockets of noxious gas are in the air, the scientist replied, "There are no pockets of noxious gas. No single gas and no other likely mixture of gases has, at ordinary temperatures and pressures, the same density as atmospheric air. Therefore, a pocket of foreign gas in that atmosphere would almost certainly either bob up like a balloon or sink like a stone in water. Why then do not the atmospheric gases separate and stay apart in accordance with specific gravities?" 2. Ozone, though heavier than oxygen, is absent in the lower layers of the atmosphere, is present in the upper layers, and is not subject to the mixing effect of the wind. The presence of ozone in the atmosphere suggests that oxygen must be still higher. As oxygen is less dense than ozone, it will tend to rise to even greater heights. Nowhere is it asked why ozone does not descend of its own weight, or at least why it is not mixed by the wind with other gases. 3. Water, though 800 times heavier than air, is held in droplets by the millions of tons miles above the ground. Clouds and mist are composed of droplets which defy gravitation. I've often wondered about that. 4. Even if perfect, elasticity is a quality of the molecules of all gases. The motion of the molecules is affected by a mechanical cause, must subside because of the gravitational attraction between the particles, and also because of the gravitational pull of the Earth. There should also be a loss of momentum as the result of the transformation of a part of the energy of motion into vibration of molecules hit in the collisions. But since the molecules of a gas at a consistent temperature, or in a perfect insulator, do not stop moving, it is obvious that a force generated in collisions drives them. The molecules of gases try to escape one another. Repulsion between the particles of gases and vapors counteracts the attraction. 5. The weight of the atmosphere is constantly changing, as the changing barometric pressure indicates. Low pressure areas are not necessarily encircled by high-pressure belts. The semi-diurnal changes in barometric pressure are not explainable by the mechanistic principles of gravitation and the heat effect of solar radiation. The cause of these variations is unknown. Did you notice there's a lot that science doesn't know? It has been known now for 2.5 centuries that there are more or less daily variations in the height of the barometer, culminating in 2 maxima and 2 minima during the course of 24 hours. Since Dr. Beale's discovery, 1664, the same observation has been made and puzzled over at every station at which pressure records were kept and studied, but without success in finding for it the complete physical explanation. In speaking of the diurnal and semi-diurnal variations of the barometer, Lord Rayleigh says, the relative magnitude of the latter semi-diurnal variations, as observed at most parts of the Earth's surface, is still a mystery, all the attempted explanation being illusory. One maximum is at 10 a.m., the other at 10 p.m. The 2 minima are at 4 a.m. and 4 p.m. The heating effect of the sun can explain neither the time when the maxima appear nor the time when the minima of these semi-diurnal variations. If the pressure becomes lower without the air becoming lighter through a lateral expansion due to heat, this must mean that the same mass of air gravitates with changing force at different hours. The lowest pressure is near the equator, in the belt of the doldrums. Yet the troposphere is highest at the equator, being on the average about 18 kilometers high there. It is lower in moderate latitudes, and only 6 kilometers high above the ground at the poles. 6. Laplace, pondering the shape of the atmospheric envelope of the Earth, came to the conclusion that the atmosphere, which rotates with the same angular velocity as the Earth, and which behaves like a fluid, must be lenticular in form. Its polar and equatorial axes must be about 35,000 and 52,000 miles, respectively. At the equator, the atmosphere must extend more than 21,000 miles above the ground. At these distances from the ground, the gravitational force of the Earth is just equal to the centrifugal force due to rotation. From the measurement of the pressure of the Earth's atmosphere, measurement based also on the principles of gravitation, it has been deduced that the atmosphere is about 17, not 21,000 miles high. Observations of the flight of meteorites and of the polar auroras lead to the conjecture that the atmosphere reaches to a height of 130 miles. Meteorites, or over 400 miles, polar auroras. Radio measurements yield about 200 miles for the upper layer, recognizable through this method of investigation. 2 computations, both based on the principle of gravitation, differ in the proportion of 17 and 21,000. Direct observations do not justify either of the computed figures. 7. Cyclones, characterized by low pressure and by winds blowing toward their centers, move counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere and clockwise in the southern hemisphere. This movement of air currents in cyclonic vortices is generally explained as the effect of the Earth's rotation. Anticyclones, characterized by high pressure and by winds blowing from their centers, move clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere. The movement of the anticyclones has not been explained and is regarded as enigmatic. Cyclones and anticyclones are considered a problem of fluidal motion with highest or lowest pressure in the center. As the movement of anticyclones cannot be explained by the mechanistic principles of gravitation and rotation, it must be concluded that the rotation of cyclones is also unexplained. 8. The area of land in the northern hemisphere of the Earth is to the area of land in the southern hemisphere as 3 is to 1. The mean weight of the land is 2 3/4 times heavier than that of water. Assuming the depth of the seas in both hemispheres to be equal, the northern hemisphere up to sea level is heavier than the southern hemisphere, if judged by sea and land distribution. The Earth masses above sea level are additional heavy loads, but this unequal distribution of masses does not affect the position of the Earth, as it does not place the northern hemisphere with its face to the sun
a dead force, like gravitation, could not keep the unequally loaded Earth in equilibrium. Also, the seasonal distribution of ice and snow, shifting in a distillation process from one hemisphere to the other, should interfere with the equilibrium of the Earth, but fails to do so. 9. Mountainous masses do not exert the gravitational pull expected by the theory of gravitation. The influence of the largest mass on the Earth, the Himalaya, was carefully investigated with plumb line on the Indian side. The plumb line is not deflected as calculated in advance. The attraction of the mountain ground, thus computed on the theory of gravitation, is considerably greater than is necessary to explain the anomalies observed. This singular conclusion, I confess at first, surprised me very much. G.B. Airy. Out of this embarrassment grew the idea of isostasy. This hypothesis explains the lack of gravitational pull by the mountains in the following way. The interior of the globe is supposed to be fluid, and the crust is supposed to float on it. The inner fluid or magma is heavier or denser. The crust is lighter. Where there is a mountainous elevation, there must also be a perturbance beneath the mountains. This immersed perturbance being of lesser mass than the magma of equal volume. The way seismic waves travel and computations of the elasticity of the interior of the Earth force the conclusion that the Earth must be as rigid as steel. But if the Earth is solid for only 2,000 miles from the surface, the crust must be more rigid than steel. These conclusions are not reconcilable with the principle of isostasy, which presupposes a fluid magma less than 60 miles below the surface of the Earth. There remains a contradiction between isostasy and geophysical data. Over the oceans, the gravitational pull is greater than over the continents. Though, according to the theory of gravitation, the reverse should be true. The hypothesis of isostasy also is unable to explain this phenomenon. The gravitational pull drops at the coastline of the continents. Furthermore, the distribution of gravitation in the sea often has the peculiarity of being stronger where the water is deeper. In the whole Gulf and Caribbean region, the generalization seems to hold that the deeper the water, the more strongly positive the anomalies. As far as observations could establish, the sea tides do not influence the plumb line, which is contrary to what is expected. Observations on reservoirs of water, where the mass of water could be increased and decreased, gave none of the results anticipated on the basis of the theory of gravitation. Remember, like I told you before, they have not made one correct prediction. It's amazing. 11. The atmospheric pressure of the Sun. Instead of being 27.47 times greater than the atmospheric pressure of the Earth, as expected because of the gravitational pull of the large solar mass, is much smaller. The pressure there varies according to the layers of the atmosphere from 1/10 to 1,000th of the barometric pressure on the Earth. At the base of the reversing layer, the pressure is 0.005 of the atmospheric pressure at sea level on the Earth. In the sunspots, the pressure drops to 1/10,000th of the pressure of the Earth. I wonder how they can measure that. The pressure of light is sometimes referred to as to explain the low atmospheric pressure on the Sun. At the surface of the Sun, the pressure of light must be 2.75 milligrams per square centimeter. A cubic centimeter of 1 gram weight at the surface of the Earth would weigh 27.47 grams at the surface of the Sun. Thus, the attraction by the solar mass is 10,000 times greater than the repulsion of the solar light. Recourse is taken to the supposition that if the pull and pressure are calculated for very small masses, the pressure exceeds the pull, one acting in proportion to the surface, the other in proportion to the volume. But if this is so, why is the lowest pressure of the solar atmosphere observed over the sunspots where the light pressure is least? 12. Because of its swift rotation, the gaseous Sun should have the latitudinal axis greater than the longitudinal, but it does not have it. The Sun is 1 million times larger than the Earth, and its day is but 26 times longer than the terrestrial day. The swiftness of its rotation at its equator is over 125 kilometers per minute. At the poles, the velocity approaches zero. Yet, solar disk is not oval but round. The majority of observers even find a small excess in the longitudinal axis of the Sun. The planets act in the same manner as the rotation of the Sun, imposing a latitudinal pull on the luminary. Gravitation that acts in all directions equally leaves unexplained the spherical shape of the Sun. As we saw in the preceding section, the gases of the solar atmosphere are not under a strong pressure, but under a very weak one. Therefore, the computation according to which the ellipsoidity of the Sun that is lacking should be slight is not correct either. Since the gases are under a very low gravitational pressure, the centrifugal force of rotation must have formed quite a flat Sun. Near the polar regions of the Sun, streamers of the corona are observed, which prolong still more the axial length of the Sun. 13. If planets and satellites were once molten masses, as cosmological theories assume, they would not have been able to obtain a spherical form, especially those which do not rotate, as Mercury or the Moon with respect to its primary. 14. The harmonic law of Kepler views the movements of the planets as depending only on their distance from the Sun. According to Newton, the masses of the Sun and the planets must also enter the formulas. The Newtonian orbits differ from the Keplerian found empirically. The Newtonian formula has a sum of masses instead of a product of masses, and in view of the largeness of the Sun, the Newtonian orbits are supposed to not deviate substantially from the Keplerian. 15. Perturbations of planets, due to their reciprocal action, are pronounced in repulsion as well as attraction. A perturbation displacing a planet or a satellite by a few seconds of arc must direct it from its orbit. It is assumed that the orbits of all planets and satellites did not change because of perturbations. A regulating force emanating from the primary appears to act. In the gravitational system, there is no place left for such regulating forces. 16. The perturbating activity appears unstable in the major planets, Jupiter and Saturn, between the minimum of the year 1898 to 99 and the maximum of the 1916-17. There was found an 18% difference. As these planets did not increase in mass in the meantime, this change is not understandable from the point of view of the theory of gravitation, which includes the principle of the immutable gravitational constant.
I know what you're thinking, Buck.
The pressure of light emanating from the Sun should slowly change the orbits of the satellites, pushing them more than the primaries, and acting constantly. This pressure should have the effect of acceleration. The pressure of light per unit of mass is greater in relation to the satellites than in relation to their primaries, but this change fails to materialize. A regulating force seems to overcome this unequal light pressure on primaries and secondaries. 18. The Sun moves in a space at a velocity of about 20 kilometers a second in relation to the nearby stars. This motion, according to Lodge, must change the eccentricities of some of the planetary orbits to an extent which far exceeds the observed values. 19. The motion of the perihelia of Mercury and Mars and of the nodes of Venus differ from what is computed with the help of the Newtonian law of gravitation. Einstein showed how his theory can account for the anomaly of Mercury. However, the smaller irregularities in the movements of Venus and Mars cannot be accounted for by Einstein's formulas. 20. Unaccounted for fluctuations in the lunar mean motion were calculated from the records of lunar eclipses of many centuries and from modern observations. These fluctuations were studied by S. Newcomb, who wrote, "I regard these fluctuations as the most enigmatic phenomenon presented by the celestial motions, being so difficult to account for by the action of any known causes, that we cannot but suspect them to arise from the action in nature hitherto unknown. They are not explainable by the forces of gravitation which emanate from the Sun and the planets." 21. It was found that the strength of radio reception was nearly doubled with the passing of the Moon from overhead to underneath the observer. It does not appear reasonable that the relatively small gravitational tide in the Earth's atmosphere which changes the barometric pressure by less than half of 1%, could account for a sufficient change in altitude of the ionized layer to produce such marked changes in the intensity of reception. The lifting of the ionosphere generally results in better radio reception, and the small tidal action by the moon when overhead should improve reception a little, not impair it. In any event, the moon cannot have a marked effect on the ionosphere without being itself a charged body. But if the moon is charged, it cannot behave in its motion as though the gravitational force alone acts between it and the Earth. 22. The tails of comets do not obey the principle of gravitation and are repelled by the sun. There is, beyond question, some profound secret and mystery of nature concerned in the phenomena of their tails. Enormous sweep which the tail, makes round the sun and perihelion, in the manner of a straight and rigid rod, is in defiance of the law of gravitation, nay, even of the recorded laws of motion. J. Herschel. What has puzzled astronomers since the time of Newton is the fact that while all other bodies in the sidereal universe, as far as we are aware, obey the law of gravitation, comets' tails are clearly subject to some strong repulsive force, which drives the matter composing them away from the sun with enormously high velocities. W. H. Pickering. 23. The change in the angular velocity of comets, especially of the comet Inca, is not in accord with the theoretical computations based on the theory of gravitation. 24. Meteors, after entering the terrestrial atmosphere at about 200 kilometers above the ground, are violently displaced toward the east. These displacements of the meteors are usually ascribed to winds blowing in the upper atmosphere. The atmospheric pressure at a height of 45 kilometers is supposed to be but a small fraction of 1 millimeter of mercury. On the other hand, the velocity with which the meteors approach the Earth is between 15 and 75 kilometers per second, on the average about 40 kilometers per second, or over 140,000 kilometers per hour. If winds of 150 kilometers per hour velocity were permanently blowing at the height where the meteors become visible, it would not be possible for such winds of rarefied atmosphere to visibly deflect stones falling at the rate of 140,000 kilometers per hour. Approaching the Earth, the meteorites suddenly slow down and turn aside, and some are even repelled into space. A few meteors give the appearance of penetrating into our atmosphere and then leaving it, ricocheting, as it were. 25. The Earth is a huge magnet. It has electric currents in the ground and is enveloped by a number of layers of electrified ionosphere. The Sun possesses an electric charge and magnetic poles. Also, the sunspots are found to be powerful magnets. The ionosphere is permanently charged by particles arriving from the Sun. Sunspots actively influence terrestrial magnetism, ground currents, the ionosphere's charge, and auroras. As the principle of gravitation leaves no room for the participation of other forces in the ordinary movements of the celestial mechanism, these obvious and permanent influences of the electromagnetic state of the Sun on the magnetic field of the Earth, the ionosphere, the auroras, and the Earth's currents are not allowed to have more than zero effect on the astronomical position of the Earth, and this for the sake of maintaining the integrity of the gravitational principle. Well, sure, if you change that, you got to change everything, right? Sun and moon, comets, planets, satellites, and meteorites, all the heavenly host, air and water, mountain massifs, and sea tides, each and all of them disobey the law of laws, which is supposed to know no exception.
To the empirical evidences of the fallacy of the law of gravitation, 4 well-known difficulties of the gravitational theory can be added. A. Gravitation acts in no time. Laplace calculated that in order to keep the solar system together, the gravitational pull must propagate with a velocity at least 50 million times greater than the velocity of light. Something we've heard before. A physical agent requires time to cover distance. Gravitation defies time. B. Matter acts where it is not, or in absentia, through no physical agent. This is a defiance of space. Newton was aware of this difficulty when he wrote in a letter to Bentley that gravity should be innate, inherent, and essential to matter, so that one body can act upon another at a distance through a vacuum without the mediation of anything else, by and through which their action and force may be conveyed from one to the other, to another. It is to me so great an absurdity that I believe no man who has in philosophical matters a competent faculty of thinking can ever fall into it. Leibniz opposed the theory of gravitation for this very reason. Gravitational force is unchangeable by any and all agents or by any medium through which it passes, always propagating as the inverse square of the distances. Gravitation is entirely independent of everything that influences other natural phenomena. De Sitter. This is a defiance of the principles governing other energies. D. Every particle in the universe must be under a tendency to be pulled apart because of the infinite mass in the universe. It is pulled to all sides by all the matter in space.
Right.
So I have to scratch my head. I'm going to have to read that one a couple times. A few additional remarks about the motion of bodies in the universe which bear upon the theory of gravitation are added here. 1. The notion of the tangential escape and or inertia of the primary motion of the planets and satellites, being adopted by all cosmogonical theories of post-Newtonian days, led all of them into insurmountable difficulties. The retrograde motion of some satellites is one of these difficulties. 2. The principle of gravitation demands an ultimate balling of all matter in the cosmos. This is not in harmony with spectral observations, which suggest even an expanding universe. An atom differs from the solar system by the fact that it is not gravitation that makes the electrons go around the nucleus, but electricity, B. Russell. Different principles are supposed to govern the motion of the planetary bodies in the macrocosm and microcosm.
There are no islands in space.
Newton explained the principle underlying the motion of the planets and the satellites by the example of a stone thrown horizontally from a mountain with such force that gravitation bends its flight so that it revolves around the Earth, coming back to exactly the same place once again to repeat the course of its flight. But he admits it is not to be conceived that mere mechanical causes could give birth to so many regular motions, and invokes an act of providence in providing each satellite with a tangential push of a strength which, together with the pull of the primary, creates an orbit. General Scholium to Book 3 of the Principia. The inertia of the tangential instantaneous push has not exhausted itself in all the eons, despite the tidal friction between a satellite and its primary, or the sun pulling the satellite away from the primary, or the resistance of matter, meteorites, in space, though all these forces act permanently and therefore with acceleration. Newton's gravitational theory is regarded as proved by the action of the tides. But studying the tides, Newton came to the conclusion that the moon has a mass equal to 1/140th of the Earth. Modern calculations based on the theory of gravitation, but not on the action of the tides, ascribe to the moon a mass equal to 1/81 of the Earth's mass. Is that 1/81st?
of the Earth's mass. The greatest triumph of the theory of gravitation was the discovery of the planet Neptune, the position of which was calculated simultaneously by Adams and Leverrier from the perturbations experienced by Uranus. But in the controversy which ensued concerning the priority in announcing the existence of Neptune, it was stressed that neither of the two scholars was the real discoverer, as both of them calculated very erroneously the distance of Neptune from the orbit. Yet even if the computations were correct, there would be no proof that gravitation and not another energy acts between Uranus and Neptune. The gravitational pull decreases as the square of the distance. Electricity and magnetism act in the same way. Newton was mistaken when he ascribed to magnetism a decrease that follows the cube. Building his system of the world, Newton put before his readers rules of reasoning and philosophy. The first rule is, we are to admit no more causes of natural things than such as are both true and sufficient to explain their appearances. Rule 2 is, therefore, to the same natural effects we must, as far as possible, assign the same causes. Thorough theoretical and experimental investigations will be necessary to build a new theory in place of now accepted theory of gravitation. For the present, we shall offer only general suggestions. 1. Attraction between two natural atoms. Each atom is made of positive and negative electricity, and though neutral as a whole, may form an electric dipole when subjected to an electric force. Thus, in the theory presented here, this attraction is not due to inherent gravitational properties of mass, but instead to the well-known electrical properties of attraction. Two dipoles arrange themselves so that the attraction is stronger than their mutual repulsion. Inertia, or the passive property of matter, the equality of active and passive, or gravitational and inertial mass, was in Newton's system a most remarkable accidental coincidence, something like a miracle. Newton himself decidedly felt it as such. W. de Sitter. In Einstein's explanation, inertia and gravitation are not two different properties, but one and the same property viewed from different points in space. Accordingly to his illustration, a man in an elevator that is being continuously pulled up by a rope invisible to the man will feel his feet pressed against the bottom of the elevator and will think that he gravitates toward the floor. But someone else observing the situation from the outside in space will judge that there is a fact of inertia the pulled elevator has to overcome, the inertia of the man standing on its floor. If the man in the elevator lets an object fall from his hand, it will approach the floor at an accelerated speed, because the elevator is being continuously pulled upward. To the observer on the outside, it rises with acceleration. By this illustration, Einstein tried to explain the equivalence of inertia and gravitation. But it is impossible to adopt this explanation for the gravitational effect of the globe. The observer from outside cannot perceive the globe as moving simultaneously in all directions. Einstein sees the difficulty and says, it is, for instance, impossible to choose a body of reference such that, as judged from it, the gravitational field of the Earth in its entirety vanishes. In our explanation, the active property is due to one kind of charge in the atom, the attracted charge, the passive property to the opposite charge, which is repelled. Both exist in equal quantities in a neutral atom. This explains the equality of the gravitating and inertial properties of matter. However, the charges must arrange themselves in such a manner that attraction precedes the attracting force, overcomes the repelling force, because the attracting poles of the dipoles are closer to one another than the repelling poles. When the repelling poles are closer, the atoms, or their combinations in molecules, repel each other, as is the case with gases. A charged body attracts more strongly than a neutral body because of the presence of free electrons. In dipoles, the charges rearrange themselves only a little, but free electrons can rearrange themselves much more. 3. Traction of bodies toward the Earth. The ionosphere is strongly charged with respect to the neutral Earth. A potential difference of 100 volts per meter altitude exists near the ground, or a difference in potentials which forces the current through the electric lamps. Does any relation exist between the difference in voltage in the lower atmosphere and the difference in weight? At the ceiling of a room 3 meters high, a kilogram weighs about 1 milligram less than at the floor. Altitude, a voltage difference per meter is not the same as near the ground, but it accumulates to a high figure. Between a point 10 miles high and the surface of the Earth, there is an electrical pressure difference of about 150,000 volts. Let me read that again. Between a point 10 miles high and the surface of the Earth, there is an electrical pressure difference of about 150,000 volts. Neutral bodies consist of both positive and negative charges. Neutral atoms form dipoles along the lines of force of the electric field, with poles turned toward the Earth and the ionosphere. Is the fall of objects due to their dipole attraction and to their movement in an electrical field as dipoles? The proximity to the ground gives its action preference over that of the ionosphere, as far as the attracting force is concerned, since the distance between the opposite electric poles of the atomic dipole is much smaller in comparison to its total distance from the ionosphere than from the ground. This means, however, that when the objects reach a certain altitude, they would be attracted upward. Meteorites, repelled into space, are apparently charged identically with the upper layer of the ionosphere. This part of the theory concerning falling bodies requires experimentation and exact calculation. It is probable that, besides carrying a charge, the ground turns all of its atoms as dipoles toward the ionosphere. 4. In contrast to electric and magnetic fields, the gravitational field exhibits a most remarkable property, which is of fundamental importance. Bodies which are moving under the sole influence of a gravitational field receive an acceleration, which does not in the least depend either on the material or the physical state of the body. Einstein. This law is supposed to hold with great accuracy. The velocity of the fall is generally explored with the help of a pendulum. It appears to us that a charged object must fall with a different velocity than a neutral object. This is generally denied, but the denial is based on the observation that there is no difference in the number of swings of a pendulum in a unit of time, in the case where a charged or neutral bob is used. This method may produce inaccurate results. In an accurate method, the falling time and the time of ascent of the pendulum must be measured separately. In the case of a charged body, the increase in the velocity of descent of the pendulum may be accompanied by a decrease in the velocity of ascent, and thus the number of swings in a unit of time would remain the same for charged and non-charged bobs. 3. Attraction, repulsion, and electromagnetic circumduction act in the solar system. Some planets, satellites, comets are charged bodies. As charged bodies, they are interdependent. The solar surface is charged negatively in relation to the charge of the Earth, as the spectral lines with the dominant red line in the spectrum of hydrogen reveal. The Sun carries a charge and rotates. It is an electromagnet. The spots of the Sun are magnetic, and the filaments of hydrogen on the Sun's surface arrange themselves as iron particles in a magnetic field. Besides the spots, the Sun as a whole is a magnet. The form of the corona and the motion of the prominences suggest that it is a magnet, wrote G.E. Hale when he undertook to detect the Zeeman effect. The Zeeman effect proved to be most pronounced at 45 degrees. In both hemispheres of the Sun, Hale found the displacement of lines decreases to zero at the equator and near the poles of rotation. and also that a first approximate value for the vertical intensity of the Sun's general field at the poles is 50 Gausses. Thus, it is confirmed that the Sun is a magnet. But the magnetic field was found not to be strong. This result is questioned here. The lines of the corona suggested that the existence of a magnetic field on the Sun to the scholar who discovered it, but the form of the corona suggests a powerful magnetic field. Visible coronal bands and streamers reach a distance equal to 10 and more diameters from the disk of the Sun. Mercury is only 40 solar diameters from the Sun, and Earth 108 solar diameters. More recent investigation by Stevens, who photographed the streamers from 25,000 feet, disclosed a globular corona more extensive than any known from ground photographs. Disturbances in filaments and vortices of the Sun affect the ionosphere of the Earth and prove the existence of a powerful charge on the Sun. Rotating at the speed of the solar rotation, a strong charge must produce a strong magnetic field. A revised investigation of the magnetic power of the field around the Sun is here suggested. It should be kept in mind that the observations have been made from the solar magnetic field in which the Earth is embedded. If our concept is correct, it is possible also that the strongest Zeeman effect will show itself in latitudes higher than 45 degrees. As is well known, the angle of observation must be taken into consideration in observing the Zeeman effect. The Sun is a rotating charged body, and it creates a magnetic field. We assume the solar charge to be large enough to produce a magnetic field with lines of force reaching the orbit of Pluto. The charged planets move at right angles to the Sun's magnetic lines of force and describe the usual circular motion to which moving charged bodies are subjected in a magnetic field. Satellites, in turn, revolve in smaller magnetic fields produced by the rotation of the charged planets. The non-rotating planets have no satellites, for they do not produce magnetic fields. If there are rotating satellites, they may be able to revolve trabants around them. The origin of the Earth's magnetic field has so far defied all attempts of solution. The cause of the Earth's magnetic field is in 1. The magnetic field of the Sun, and 2. The rotation of the charged Earth around its axis. It has been calculated that if the Earth is a magnet because of the rotating charge on its surface, the charge must be so great as to enter as a serious factor in planetary perturbations. We have constructed a theory according to which the members of the solar system are charged bodies. Electric attraction and repulsion and the electromagnetic circumduction act in the system. The origin of the magnetic field around the Sun is in its charge. The Sun is an electromagnet. Planetary motion is due to the electromagnetic force exerted on the planets by the Sun. The planets, as charged bodies, create magnetic fields by their rotation. It follows that A. Gravity, depending on electrical charge, varies with the charge, and B. The masses of the planets are inaccurately calculated. C. The positive and negative charges are manifested only in relation to the charge of the Earth. One of the differences between the concept of celestial mechanism expounded here and the theories of gravitation of Newton and Einstein, that in our understanding the revolution of the moon is a process of a different order from that of the falling of objects near the terrestrial ground. The revolution of the moon is a phenomenon of circumduction of a charge by a magnetic field, and is not a fall combined with inertia. The primary motion of planets and satellites along a straight line is a fallacious notion. At the distance of the moon, the electromagnetic field of the Earth causes circumduction, while in the terrestrial atmosphere, the electric field between the Earth and the ionosphere causes the movement of the dipoles. Like the moon, the Earth and other planets and satellites are subject to electromagnetic circumduction. 4. Universal gravitation is an electromagnetic phenomenon in which the charges in the atoms, the free charges, the magnetic fields of the Sun, and the planets play their parts. In the frame of this theory, the following phenomena become explainable.
All planets revolve in approximately one plane. They revolve in a plane perpendicular to the lines of force of the Sun's magnetic field. 2. Planets have a greater aggregate
energy of motion than the sun. The revolution of the planets did not originate in their angular velocity of rotation of the sun. The magnetic field of the sun affected their revolution. Also, the fact that one of the satellites of Mars revolves with an angular speed greater than that of the rotation of this planet is explained here by electromagnetic circumduction. 3. The retrograde revolution of a number of satellites. It is due either to retrograde rotation of the primary with inversed magnetic poles or to a difference of charges. The fact that the retrograde satellites of Jupiter and Saturn are most remote from the primaries poses the problem whether their remoteness from the primaries and their relative closeness to the Sun play a role in their being of a presumably different charge than the other satellites of Jupiter and Saturn. In the case of Uranus, the retrograde revolution of its satellites follows the retrograde rotation of the planet and its magnetic field. One of the magnetic poles of Uranus can be readily investigated because it faces the ecliptic. 4. The rotation of the Earth. The tidal theory fails to account for the rotation of the planets. The position of the magnetic poles of the Earth at a distance of about 20 degrees from the geographical poles may be related to the rotation of the Earth. Once each day, the magnetic poles of the Earth occupy the southernmost and the northernmost positions in the lines of the magnetic field of the Sun. 5. Perturbations among the members of the solar system are actions of attraction as well as of repulsion, and depend on the charges of the planets and satellites and their magnetic properties. The fact that after perturbations the planets resume their normal courses is due to the regulating action of the Sun's magnetic field. Similarly, the satellites are regulated in their motion by the electromagnetic fields of the primaries. 6. The anomalies in the motion of Mercury and other planets. The velocities of revolution of the planets depend on their charges. A strongly charged body is carried across the lines of the magnetic field more swiftly than a weakly charged body. If the charge of a planet increases, the velocity of revolution of such a planet must increase too. Positive as well as negative charges arrive from the Sun in an uninterrupted flow. The planet Mercury moves faster and faster. This must be the result of an increasing charge of the planet. Also, the anomalies in the motion of other inner planets may be attributed to a changing charge. Other irregularities in the motion of the planets can be attributed to the fact that the electrical charge of the Sun is not equally distributed on the solar surface. 7. The deflection of a ray of light passing close to the Sun. Before attributing the deflection to the gravitational field of the Sun, the influence of the magnetic field of the Sun on the rotation of light should be calculated. The influence of the Moon on a ray of light by creating a ripple in the atmosphere during a solar eclipse must not be overlooked. An investigation of the trajectory of a stellar ray passing close to the Moon in a lunar eclipse is suggested here. 8. The repulsion of a comet's tail by the Sun. The head of a comet and its tail are charged under a great potential difference, accounting for the manifest repulsion of the tail and attraction of the head. The neck of the comet is probably composed of a positive and negative elements in equal proportion, thus forming a neutral zone between the head and the tail. Under the influence of the temperature in space, the charges change and the comet returns on its orbit. 9. The displacement of meteorites in the higher atmosphere. It is caused not by the winds, but by the electromagnetic effect of the ionosphere. The light of the meteorites is caused by electric discharges. Consequently, the passage of meteorites disturbs radio reception.
Give me some sugar, baby.
10. The influence of the Moon on radio reception. The charged Moon on its hourly stations exerts an attracting, repelling action on the electrified layers of the atmosphere, ionosphere, to a greater degree than the insulating layer of the Earth's atmosphere. 11. The semi-diurnal variations of the barometric pressure. These variations with maxima at 10 a.m. and 10 p.m., have their cause in the semi-diurnal changes of the change of the ionosphere at the same hours, 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. The barometric pressure reflects the degree of attraction exerted by the ground and the ionosphere on the gaseous envelope. I have to read that one a couple times too. 12. The defiance of gravity by water and cloud building. The ground and the ionosphere induce the secondary charge layers in the atmosphere. In such a secondary layer, cloud building takes place. Generation of electricity in clouds is due not to the friction of neutral clouds on mountain ridges, or to the friction of neutral clouds among themselves, or to the friction of droplets by the gravitational pull on them, but to the fact that droplets rise already charged toward the charged layer of the atmosphere, and clouds are further subjected to induction by the ground and the ionosphere. This explains also the segregation of the charges in the upper and lower levels of the clouds. 13. Defiance of gravity experienced in the cumulonimbus clouds. This defiance recorded by airplane pilots is the result of charges and electromagnetic effects prevailing in these clouds. 14. The direction of the cyclonic and anticyclonic whirls, their direction on the Earth as well as on the Sun, depends on the electromagnetic fields and not the rotation on these bodies. 15. Increased gravity over the sea. The increased gravity over the sea is compared with that over the continent, may be explained by the higher charge of salt water. Yes, salt does seem to cater to a higher charge. There were a few attempts made to unite the electromagnetic and gravitational field theories, but as far as I know, nobody has tried to solve the problem of planetary movement around the Sun as a motion of charged bodies in a magnetic field. My explanation implies that the measurement of the solar magnetic field by Hale is not correct. If the Sun has a significantly strong magnetic field so as to reach the farthest of the planets, the quantitative elements are dictated by the charge of the Sun, the strength of its magnetic field, and the charge of the planets. The theory of cosmos without gravitation, given here in synopsis, is written also in a comprehensive form, 1941 to 43. I arrived at this concept early in 1941. As a result of my research in the history of cosmic upheavals, as they affected the Earth and other members of the solar system. A number of facts proved to me that the Sun, the Earth, and other planets, the satellites, and the comets are charged bodies, that the planets and their satellites have changed their orbits repeatedly and radically, and that gravitational attraction, or the weight of objects, has changed during human history. I thus recognize the fact that not gravitation, but electric attraction and repulsion and electromagnetic circumduction govern the solar system. In construction, the electromagnetic theory of the solar system, I am indebted to Miss Shulamith Velikovsky for valuable suggestions on the dipole explanation of attraction between the atoms and the dipole concept of inertia. I've never seen a paradigm change in my life. I don't think there has been one in my lifetime. So we're way overdue. I doubt seriously the gurus of mainstream will ever admit that their life's work is a total failure because they're going on their own pride and hubris. But eventually, they'll be dragged there kicking and screaming, I'm sure. Check out this short bit by Wal Thornhill to show just how screwed up our science is. Recommend watching the whole video. You'll see a link in the description. That'll do it. Take care. I'll see you on down the road.
So we're treated more or less as chemically driven machines. We have become lab rats for the pharmaceutical industry and the medical and food technologists. Far worse, publicly funded research has been corrupted by industry, influencing government and regulators to shut down research into alternative modalities on the basis that they're impossible. Never listen to an expert when they say something is impossible, because they're the last to know when a paradigm shift is about to come. Here's one I took out of a magazine. Talk about misleading. See a difference, GMO corn and non-GMO corn? Neither can science. Well, that says a lot about the blindness of science. It's certainly not an argument for GMO corn, given our limited understanding of living systems and the interconnectedness of everything. Genetic engineering is an experiment with unknown consequences, since it relies on a flawed understanding of genetics. They're only beginning to get involved in epigenetics, that is, the changing of the genetic information in a living creature during their lifetime. We have great hulking molecules of DNA with an unknown number of genes that interact with one another in unknown ways under circumstances we don't know. That's terrific. Really gives you confidence, doesn't it? I should point out too that we have less genes than a nematode and less than a grape. This gives you an idea that the morphogenesis of an embryo has more to do with signals from outside, and the DNA is more or less a factory floor acting under instruction. So all you need in the DNA is the instructions on how to make things, in other words, the coding for the proteins and so on. But what switches them on and off is something that really needs to be investigated. I'll talk more about that later. It assumes a closed system, and as I said, yet epigenetics shows that gene expression is somehow tuned to environmental signals. Science hasn't figured out yet what all of those junk sequences do. When they say junk, it just means I don't understand. Once again, we're treated as lab rats to a whatever cells culture with no thought of the consequences in such an unfathomed ecosystem. Here we go. To know the future, don't ask an expert. And this is Richard Feynman. Learn from science that you must doubt the experts. As a matter of fact, I can also define science another way. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. I mean, when you look at the history, it's dreadful. Ignaz Semmelweis could offer no acceptable scientific explanation for his findings, and some doctors were offended at the suggestion that they should wash their hands between the autopsy room and the delivery room. I mean, you think about it now, it just seems incredible. I would also say that the words debunk and labelling dissidents denier shows the agenda to be unscientific. Debunking is a case of selecting the evidence to suit your argument and ignoring the evidence that doesn't fit. It's the sort of thing that skeptics do. Yeah, it's impossible that washing hands between the autopsy room and the childbirth ward will prevent deaths from puerperal fever. Heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Cold fusion is impossible. I saw a show of hands on a television interview with the experts, and there was one guy who was obviously the alpha male, the dominant one, and he put his hand up and he looked along like this, waiting for the others to put their hands up, and the others sort of, finally put their hands up. So this is how you do science. It's a media show. Of course, homeopathy is impossible. But if you don't understand structured water and Jerry Pollack's work, of course it's impossible. And also the transfer of information faster than light is impossible, isn't it? And yet the Earth manages to maintain its orbit around the Sun by knowing where the Sun is at this instant, not 8 minutes ago. Future science. Sir Fred Hoyle. The future is a different universe. They do things electrically there in the electric universe. Now, he didn't say that. What he did say is, it's a strange thought, but I believe a correct one, that 20 or 30 pages of ideas and information would be capable of turning the present-day world upside down, or even destroying it. I have often tried to conceive of what those pages might contain, but of course I am a prisoner of the present-day world, just as all of you are. Well, not us. We cannot think outside the particular patterns that our brains are conditioned to, or, to be more accurate, we can only think a very little way outside, and then only if we are very original. That was in his book Of Men and Galaxies. So the electric universe is the path less travelled.
This was the greatest. And let me ask you another question. Is a theory of uniformitarianism, which means that nothing what happened in the past could have happened if it doesn't happen today?
Flush out your kidney, okay?
After my lecture before the forum, it happened that at a concert at Carter Theater in Princeton, we met Einstein. It may be that he made up his mind to show a little of his change of heart in order to erase the impression of rejection he had left me over a year earlier. During the intermission, he stood up, greeted us from his seat a short distance away, and asked me to sit and chat with him. I took a temporarily vacant seat in the row in front of him, turning my head to hear him speak. There was something very unusual in this man. I am not a hero worshiper, more nearly an iconoclast. Great names do not startle me, nor do they make me feel humble. But in Einstein, I felt this time something I had not felt on meeting him in Berlin, when he was a jolly man in his early 40s, who had achieved singular and spectacular success, which was still new to him, and I was still in my 20s. Nor when I spent time with him again in New York in the spring of 1940, nor when I visited him in the summer of 1946. In 1921, he was a young-looking man with well-filled cheeks, warm and sparkling eyes, a forehead framed by dark wavy hair, and his mustache over soft lips, with a ready laugh. Almost the likeness of a bon vivant Epstein, who portrayed him several years later as flimsy, furrowed, and wiry, did not succeed at all. Now, 30 years later, at the age of 74, the change in his appearance was very great. He had grown old, yet stood erect, with his gray-white hair now long falling on his collar. He had a kind face and a clear and sonorous voice. Sufferings and private losses in human destiny had cleansed him and spiritualized him. He looked at me with kindness and warmly pressed my hand with his own fleshy hand. The madness of his face lit up. I reminded him of the scripta on which we had worked together in Berlin. This made him wonder aloud on the mystery of time. Is time a stream flowing always in one direction, from the present to the past? Do the present, future, and past still exist? All exist simultaneously? He wondered and asked me. Yet he brought counter-argument to his own thought. But we cannot remember things that are in the future. This did not appear to me to be a valid argument, but I did not say so. Instead, I referred to Plato's discourse on simultaneous existence of the past and the future. The field of parapsychology deals with such problems. Yes, once I wrote and published something on the subject, and Freud commented in a letter. Einstein asked me whether I still had Freud's letters and whether he could read one. I promised to select a letter for him to read, and we continued so. Already old friends. When the bell called the audience into the hall, I returned to my seat. I sent Einstein the letter of Freud that he wished to see. In that particular letter, Freud wrote me, as usual by longhand, that he had similar, almost identical ideas, and that he would subscribe to the preface to my work written by Eugene Bleuler. A single week passed. There was again a concert at McCarter Theater. Einstein hardly showed himself twice a year in public, but this time he came again. Again, during the intermission, he sat across the aisle. He asked me to take the vacant seat next to him. Some of the Princeton graduate students sat in a row in front of my wife, as she could hear them wondering at this fellowship. Einstein, when in public, was of course the center of attention, though the public tried not to make this too obvious. Einstein spoke of religion and mentioned Spinoza, a spirit toward whom he probably felt affinity. Like himself, Spinoza was a lonely man. Like himself, he was not concerned with material goods. And, like himself, he was in conflict with men. Though he was kind and humane, and like himself, he was deeply religious, though not in the church or synagogue. And it is no wonder, if one considers the great sufferings to which his mentor, Uriel Acosta, was subjected. One of the saddest chapters, but Spinoza was an Aristotelian, without wishing to be so. The cold reason which insists on explaining away anything unusual or singular separated Aristotle from his teacher Plato, who tended to the esoteric, the wonderful, and the singular. Not long after my wife and I received an invitation to have tea with Einstein. The day before our visit, I found in the mail a letter in which the writer, a resident of Seaford in England, wrote, "The authorities will object to your subversion of their life work, but it is from their minor followers that the bitterest opposition will come. Those who exercise authority are not so shocked by rebellion as their underlings. They are doubly offended, for you threaten their security and insult their judgment. The one Roman Catholic I would expect to sympathize with my doubts on infallibility would be His Holiness. It is the hedge priest and Sunday school teacher who would cry blasphemy." Black triangles are a class of unidentified flying objects with certain common features which have reportedly been observed since the 1940s to present. Reports of black triangles generally originate from the United States and Britain. Reports generally describe this class of UFOs as enormous, silent, black triangular crafts, hovering or slowly cruising at low altitudes over cities and highways, usually at night, making no attempt to evade detection. They just sit there. It's like they're just like, here I am, see me. I'm America's most classified airframe. I guess that's kind of what they call soft disclosure. These crafts are often described as having running lights, either bright, white lights or pulsing colored lights that appear at each corner of the triangle. Now, this reprint of the TR-3B specifications claim is based on information generally credited to Edgar Fouché, who claimed involvement, I've seen his video, it's quite good, who claimed involvement with this project in the 1990s. We make no claims about whether this is factually accurate or not. At this point, I don't think there's any way that they can deny it. I mean, hundreds of thousands of people know about it and have seen it. It's probably going to be declassified soon, I would imagine. Unless it already is. I would probably think it is. But this story becomes more interesting as time progresses. What was originally considered to be a wacky UFO claim seems to be the benefactor of a great deal of coincidence as AG research moves forward. Simply put, the TR-3B's claim to use an MHD torus field with a virtual plasma of high-pressure mercury is strikingly similar to the unrelated claims of Igor Velikovsky about the construction of the Nazi Bell device, as well as anecdotal evidence relating to other instances of AG effects, anti-gravity effects, and mercury in the presence of RF fields, radio frequency fields, I'm thinking. Additionally, a plasma toroid is the only means of replicating some aspects of Eugene Plekhanov's superconductor experiments on a larger scale than achievable through traditional Type II ceramic superconductors. Plasmas and SCs both absorb magnetic field lines. It should be noted that none of the individuals in any of these claims were aware of each other's existence when they published their work, making the similarities quite striking. The Tactical Reconnaissance, TR-3B's code name, Astra. Now, it's interesting, Astra, that's an ancient name that was given to the Vermanas, if I'm not mistaken. First operational flight was in the early 90s. The triangular-shaped nuclear-powered aerospace platform was developed under the top-secret Aurora program with SDI and black budget monies. At least 3 of the billion-dollar-plus TR-3Bs were flying by 1994. The Aurora is the most classified aerospace development program in existence. The TR-3B is the most exotic vehicle created by the Aurora program. It is funded and operationally tasked by the National Reconnaissance Office, the NSA, and the CIA. The TR-3B Flying Triangle is not fiction. With technology available in the mid-80s, not every UFO spotted is one of theirs. The TR-3B vehicle's outer coating is reactive to electrical radar stimulation and can change reflectiveness, radar absorptiveness, and color. This polymer skin, when used in conjunction with the TR-3B's electric countermeasures and ECCM, can make the vehicle look like a small aircraft or a flying cylinder, or even trick radar receivers into falsely detecting a variety of aircraft, no aircraft, or several aircraft at various locations. A circular plasma-filled accelerator ring called the magnetic field disruptor surrounds the rotatable crew compartment and is far ahead of any imaginable technology. Sandia and Livermore Laboratories developed the reverse-engineered MFD technology. Reverse-engineered from what, pray tell? The government will go to any lengths to protect this technology. The plasma, mercury-based, it's all over the internet. It's almost like the stealth fighter when it first got known. Everybody thought it was crazy, and then they started talking about it, and the next thing you know, they just came out with it. It's just about the same thing. The plasma, mercury-based, is pressurized at 250,000 atmospheres at a temperature of 150 degrees Kelvin and accelerated to 50,000 RPM to create a superconductive plasma with the resulting gravity disruption. The MFD generates a
magnetic vortex field, which disrupts or neutralizes the effects of gravity on mass within proximity by 89%. Do not misunderstand. This is not anti-gravity. Anti-gravity provides a repulsive force that can be used for propulsion. The MFD creates a disruption of the Earth's gravitational field upon the mass with the circular accelerator. The mass of the circular accelerator and all mass within the accelerator, such as the crew capsule, avionics, MFD system, fuels, crew, environmental system, and nuclear reactor, are reduced by 89%. This causes the effect of making the vehicle extremely light and able to outperform and outmaneuver any aircraft yet constructed, except, of course, those UFOs we did not build. This was in the Navy video I did. This was our hot rod that I was relating to. The TR-3B is a high-altitude stealth reconnaissance platform with an indefinite loiter time, and it also has weapons on board, as you'll see. Once you get it up there at speed, it doesn't take much propulsion to maintain altitude. At Groom Lake, there have been whispered rumors of a new element that acts as a catalyst to the plasma. With the vehicle mass reduced by 89%, the craft can travel at Mach 9, vertically or horizontally. My sources say performance is limited only to the stresses that the human pilots can endure, which is a lot, really, considering along with the 89% reaction in mass, the G-forces are also reduced by 89%. The TR-3B's propulsion is provided by 3 multi-mode thrusters mounted at each bottom corner of the triangular platform. The TR-3B is a sub-Mach 9 vehicle until it reaches altitudes above 120,000 feet. Then God knows how fast it can go. The multi-mode rocket engines, mounted under each corner of the craft, use hydrogen or methane as oxygen and oxygen as propellant. In a liquid oxygen-hydrogen rocket system, 85% of the propellant mass is oxygen. The nuclear thermal rocket engine uses hydrogen propellant augmented with oxygen for additional thrust. The reactor heats the liquid hydrogen and injects liquid oxygen in the supersonic nozzle so that the hydrogen burns concurrently in the liquid oxygen afterburner. The multi-mode propulsion system can operate in the atmosphere with thrust provided by the nuclear reactor, in the upper atmosphere with hydrogen propulsion, and in orbit with the combined hydrogen-oxygen propulsion. What you have to remember is that the 3 rocket engines only have to propel 11% of the mass of the top-secret TR-3B. The engines are reportedly built by Rockwell. Many sightings of triangular UFOs are not alien vehicles, but top-secret TR-3B. The NSA, NRO, CIA, and USAF have been playing a shell game with aircraft nomenclature, creating the TR-3B modified to the TR-3A, the TR-3B, and their Tier 2, 3, and 4, with suffixes like plus or minus added on to confuse further the fact that each of these designators is a different aircraft and not the same aerospace vehicle. A TR-3B is as different from the TR-3A as a banana is from a grape. Some of these vehicles are manned and others are not. Very interesting indeed. Arctic Ocean in the north and the Kolyma in the east. In Worlds in Collision, page 329, I expressed my belief that human settlements would be discovered farther to the north on the Kolyma or Lena rivers flowing into the Arctic Ocean. On the lower Lena, north of the confluence with Philly, inside the polar circle. Monuments are found of a characteristic culture. Outstanding finds were made near Lake Yolba, not far from Gigants. As soon as the archaeologists started a methodic investigation of the area, in Yakutsk itself was found a workshop of an ancient metallurgist, in which, at the end of the 2nd millennium, before the present era, he made bronze axes similar to the axes manufactured about that time in the Near East and in Europe. In the Yakutsk taiga, 2.5 or 3,000 years ago, there already lived artisans in metals who were able to extract copper from ore, to melt it and pour it into forms, and to make axes. Beautiful bronze tips for the spears, knives, and even swords. These relics of a civilization in the taiga of northwestern Siberia imply that the climate changed there in the age of advanced man.
Before the ice froze the region, voracious members of the elephant family roamed there in large herds. Recent finds in geology. Archaeological evidence of continental upheavals in the second millennium having been presented in detail by Schaefer, the evidence of geology and paleontology called for elucidation. To this, I have dedicated a special work, now close to completion, and since it will be published before very long, I shall refer here only briefly to some of this material. A little over a decade ago, it was observed that in the gold-digging hydraulic giants in Fairbanks District in Alaska, sluicing out miles-long cuts opened great hecatombs of animals. Their numbers are appalling. The Bronze Age may have been well on its way in the centers of ancient civilization. Palms were found to have grown in northern Greenland, where now, for half a year, there is darkness, and it is permanently cold. At some time in the remote past, corals grew in Spitsbergen and sequoia forests in Alaska, and it was early understood that the terrestrial axis must have changed its position. Airy, Lord Kelvin, George Darwin, and many others, including Schiaparelli and Simon Newcomb, participated in a long debate on the astronomical and geological possibility of a sudden change in the direction of the terrestrial axis. A debate that was erroneously thought to have started as a consequence of worlds in collision. It was understood that such a change must have taken place unless the strange finds are to be left without explanation. The theory of drifting continents, offered as a substitute, was rejected for many reasons. Jeffrey showed that the mobile force invoked by Wagner is 100 billion times too small to move the continents. Eddington thought that possibly only the crust in its entirety moved, and the axis of the core was left unchanged in direction. But the mobile force he invoked, the tidal inequalities of lunar origin, would not have moved the latitudes out of their places, the directional pull being east to west. W.B. Wright, in his The Quaternary Ice Age, 2nd edition, 1937, says that during geological history there occurred many changes in the position of the climatic zones on the surface of the Earth, which cannot be explained except by a shifting of the axis or a displacement of the pole from its present position. But what could have brought about a change in the inclination of the terrestrial axis to the plane of the ecliptic? I discussed this question in the closing pages of Worlds in Collision and suggested the entrance of the Earth into a strong magnetic field. The newly developed science of paleomagnetism brought and daily continues to bring confirmation of the fact that lavas and igneous rocks in all parts of the world are reversely magnetized. But what is even more startling is to find that the reversely magnetized rocks are 100 times more strongly magnetized than the Earth's magnetic field could have caused them to be. H. Manley, in his review, writes, "It may seem strange that a rock which is made magnetic by the Earth's field should become so strongly magnetized compared to the generating force. This is one of the most astonishing problems of paleomagnetism." Manley also refers to the tests made years ago by G. Fulgemerator and P.L. Mercanton on the clay of ancient Etruscan vases. They were found to have been fired when the vases were closer to the south magnetic pole. Their position during the firing is known because of the flow of the glaze, and the magnetic dip or inclination of the clay is found. Manley writes, "This implies that in the 6th century BC, the Earth's magnetic field was reversed in the central Mediterranean area." He speaks also of a general reversal in historical times, 2,500 years ago, that must be cleared up by additional research. Knowing from my study of ancient literary sources The proper time of exogenous disturbances in terrestrial rotation, I suspected an inaccuracy in the last sentence of an otherwise well-written article by Manley. The reversal must have occurred in the 8th century and again in the beginning of the 7th, minus 687. I was gratified to find in the original publication of Professor Mercanton, to whom I directed my inquiry, that the vases with reversed polarity date from the 8th century. I expect that, should the research be extended to vases dating from the end of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt, circa 3,500 years ago, other periods of unnatural polarity would be determined in Egypt and elsewhere. Professor R. Daly of Harvard University found that 3,500 years ago, all over the world, the level of the ocean suddenly dropped. He thought it might be due to a sudden sinking of the crust. And in an authoritative work, Marine Geology, 1950, Professor P.H. Kuenen of the Netherlands finds that this recent shift is now well established. On observations in many places of the world, and he too assigns this catastrophic drop of the ocean level to 3,500 years ago. The recent expedition of the Oceanographic Institute at Gothenburg under H. Peterson, which covered the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans, found, according to its leader, evidences of great catastrophes that have altered the face of the Earth. He speaks of climatic catastrophes and of tectonic catastrophes that raised or lowered the ocean bottom hundreds, even thousands of feet, spreading huge tidal waves which destroyed plant and animal life on the coastal plains at many places. A lava bed of geologically recent origin was covered only by a thin veneer of sediment. He discovered that the Pacific and Indian Ocean beds consist largely of volcanic ash that had settled on the bottom after great volcanic explosions. He also found a large nickel content in the clay of the ocean bottoms and decided that this abysmal nickel must have been of meteoric origin. Consequently, he concludes there were very heavy showers of meteors. The principal difficulty of this explanation is that it requires a rate of accretion of meteoric dust several hundred times greater than that which astronomers are presently prepared to admit. Professor Ewing of Columbia University carried on his investigation in the Atlantic. In 1949, he published his results and, like Peterson, found that lava spread only recently on the bottom of the ocean. He also came upon signs of land deep on the bottom of the ocean and concluded either the land must have sunk 2 to 3 miles or the sea must have been 2 or 3 miles lower than now. Either conclusion is startling. The pollen analysis made by various scientists of the bottom of the North Sea between Germany, England, Scotland, and Norway convinced researchers that this area, in its present shape, originated only very recently, in the subboreal, the date of 1500 before the present era often being selected. At that time, there occurred a climastris. Once there had been a sea, then it was covered by debris carried from the mountains of Norway. Later, in a catastrophic advance, the North Sea was formed once more. Human artifacts have been found from the time when the North Sea was land. The investigation of the delta formation of the Bear River on the Alaskan border, very carefully made by Hansen, showed that at the present rate of sedimentation, the delta is estimated to be only 3,600 years old. A. de la Parent, the leading French geologist of the beginning of the century, calculated that since the time the Rhone Glacier started to melt, less than 3,000 years have passed. Modern research confirms that many of the alpine glaciers are less than 4,000 years old. Professor Flint of Yale refers to the redetermination of the age of the Upper Great Gorge of Niagara Falls and writes, 1947, The age of the Upper Great Gorge is calculated as somewhat more than 4,000 years. And to obtain even this low figure, we have to assume that the rate of recession has been constant, although we know that discharge has in fact varied greatly during post-glacial times. Surnander and others demonstrated that in 1500 and again after minus 1800, Surnander and others demonstrated that in minus 1500 and again after minus 800, there occurred climatic catastrophes of global dimensions. These researches, unknown to me when I wrote Worlds in Collision, coincide completely with my conclusions and their dating. In both these periods, the lake dwellings in Switzerland, Germany, northern Italy, and also in Scandinavia were overwhelmed by high water catastrophes and abandoned, the first time for 4 centuries, the second time never to be rebuilt. H. Gams and R. Norhagen showed with very extensive documentation that at these 2 time dates, the lakes of Europe were tilted, and many of them, like Essie and Federsee, were emptied of all their water. The Isartal in the Bavarian Alps was violently torn out, and this in very recent times. And in the Entel in the Tyrol, the many changes of riverbeds were indicative of ground movements on a great scale. H. D. Terra of the Carnegie Institute and Peterson of Harvard came to the conclusion that the Himalayas in violent upheavals reached their present form and height in the age of man, partly even in the time of advanced man. The same conclusion is made concerning the Andes, where, too, the upheaval must have been catastrophic. In the age of man, the Andes rose many thousands of feet amid volcanic activity. In the hills of Montreal and New Hampshire and in Michigan, 500 and 600 feet above sea level, bones of whales have been found. In many places on the earth, in all continents, bones of sea animals and polar land animals and tropical animals have been found in great melees. So also in the Cumberland Cave in Maryland, and in the Chakotine Fissure in China, and in Germany and Denmark. Hippopotami and ostriches were found together with seals and reindeer. Wherever we turn our interest, from the Arctic to the Antarctic, and from sunrise to sunset, in the high mountains and in the deep seas, we find innumerable signs of great upheavals, ancient and recent. A circular meteoric crater, Chubb crater, was discovered in the summer of 1950 in northern Labrador. It covers an area of 4 square miles. It is much larger than the Arizona crater, which is 4/5 of a mile in diameter, 2/3 of a square mile in area, whereas the Arizona crater could accommodate 2 million people in its amphitheater. The Chubb crater could accommodate 12 million people. It must have been created by the impact of an asteroid, according to the published opinion of geological authorities. The asteroid must have fallen about 4,000 years ago. Following or shortly preceding the discovery of the Chubb crater, several other large meteoric craters were discovered in Australia, Arabia, and Mexico. The tens of thousands of oval formations on the Atlantic coast of the United States, especially in the Carolinas, some of them attaining a length of a few miles each, were conclusively identified in a monograph by W. F. Prouty, 1952, as having been caused by a fall of large meteorites. And finally, the largest crater formations situated in Quebec north of Sept Isles in Canada, and occupying an area of 680 square miles. This is under investigation as to its meteoric origin by a group of Mines Department scientists led by Dr. M.J.S. Innes. Of the many other new developments in the field of geology, I would stress some of the results obtained by the radiocarbon method, the time of the Ice Age, is moved much closer to our time. Instead of 25,000 years as the terminal date of the last glacial period, it is shown that 10,000 or 11,000 years ago, the ice was still advancing. And even with this low dating, there remain puzzling exceptions. Among them, the finding of mastodons and mammoths in strata only 3,500 years old. Moreover, organic vestiges in the drift of the last glaciation have been found to be of a radiocarbon age pointing to a time 3,500 years ago. Radiocarbon analysis of oil has also shown that in the deposits of the Gulf of Mexico, the age of the oil is measured in thousands of years, not millions. This destroys the main arguments the geologists have raised against the theory of the exogenous origin of some deposits of oil. Worlds in Collision, page 53 and 58. And 369. Hydrocarbons have been identified in cometary tails by spectral analysis. Also, carbohydrates, edible products. But here, we are already outside the domain of geology and in the realm of astronomy. Worlds in Collision and recent finds in astronomy. In the years when the manuscript of Worlds in Collision was in the hands of the Macmillan Company, accepted for publication, though not yet published, 1946 to 49, and in the years following, though not yet published, 1946 to 49, the zodiacal light, or the glow seen in the evening sky after sunset, stretching in the path of the sun and other planets, ecliptic, the mysterious origin of which has for a long time occupied the minds of astronomers, has been explained in recent years as the reflection of the solar light from the two rings of dust particles, one following the orbit of Venus, the other in orbit between Mars and Jupiter, places where, according to Worlds in Collision, collisions of planets and a comet took place. The origin of asteroids, or small planets, that circle between Jupiter and Mars, some of which cross the orbit of Mars, and even that of the Earth, has lately been explained as the result of the explosion of a planet, or more recently, 1950, as the result of a collision between two planets in an early age, Kuiper. N.T. of the Perkins Observatory offered anew in his own explanation of the origin of the asteroids. They are remnants of a gigantic prehistoric comet. F. Whipple, upon calculating the orbits of the asteroids, came to the conclusion, 1950, two collisions occurred between these bodies and a comet once 4,700 years ago, and the second time 1,500 years ago, or within historical times. These dates of collision in the solar system are of the same order as those offered in Worlds in Collision. Deduced there from historical evidence and testimony of C. Tombaugh, the discoverer of Pluto, explained, 1950. The dark areas and the canals of Mars are resulting from collisions of Mars with asteroids. According to Worlds in Collision, Mars was involved in repeated collisions with large cometary masses. Actually, in January 1950, an explosion observed on Mars was interpreted by Openick as a collision with an asteroid. Clouds of dust of continental dimensions rose and screened surface features of the planet. O. Sturvey of Yerkes Observatory reviewed the achievements of astronomy during 1950, wrote that, by a bizarre coincidence, in that year, a deluge of sound papers on collisions within the solar system followed on the heels of Worlds in Collision. There are two theories concerning the origin of lunar craters. Their size is enormous. Nothing comparable is known on Earth. According to one theory, these craters are the result of a collision of the Moon with very large meteorites of the size of asteroids. According to the other theory, they are volcanic formations. Both theories assumed very violent events in which the celestial body closest to the Earth was involved. In Worlds in Collision, I offered the following explanation of the lunar craters, as well as of the seas of lava and the rifts of the lunar surface. During the great catastrophes, when the Moon, together with the terrestrial globe, passed through the fabric of a great comet, and again when in the 8th century before the present era, the Earth and the Moon were strongly perturbed by Mars. The Moon's surface flowed with lava and bubbled into great circular formations, which rapidly cooled off in the long lunar night, unprotected by an atmosphere from the coolness of cosmic spaces. In these cosmic collisions and near contacts, the surface of the Moon was also marked by clefts and rifts. If the circular formations on the Moon are these bubbles which collapsed, then probably there are smaller bubbles on the Moon that have not yet burst. Dr. H. Percy Wilkins, the English selenographer, actually found over 40 unexploded bubbles or domes on the Moon, several of which lie to the northeast of Copernicus crater. The largest of these is found within Darwin crater and is 20 miles in diameter, according to an article by F. Benario in Vega, 1953. I have expressed my opinion that many comets are of recent origin, and I have supported this view by reference to the frequency and luminosity of comets in the days of Imperial Rome, in comparison to the number of comets visible to the unaided eye in the last centuries. This notion received vigorous confirmation in the extensive work on comets done in Soviet Russia by a leading authority on the subject, Professor S.K. Veskenviatsky. His research reveals that periodic comets, as observed during recent decades, are losing their luminosity and their matter at a rate so rapid that 50 or 60 revolutions suffice to degenerate a comet completely. Thus, the Halley comet can hardly go back beyond 3,500 years, or the year 1500 before the present era. In the last century, several comets with short periods have failed to return, having apparently lost all their matter, and a few others actually fell apart before the eyes of observers. The rapid decay of comets excludes the possibility that they have belonged to our solar system from the beginning. Or from the time the planets were formed. The theory that sees in comets bodies that arrived from other solar systems has been generally abandoned. Vetsvietsky also shows why we must reject a theory of the capture of comets from a cloud of dust and gases through which our solar system presumably passed sometime in the past. He comes to the conclusion that the comets were born in eruptions from planets, even from satellites like our Moon, where circular formations indicate violent events in the past. But the main activity must have taken place on Jupiter and Saturn. And what are we seeing right now? Jupiter and Saturn have new moons, and they're small. The major planets, as the form of orbits of the short-period comets suggest, this is a revival of the theory of R. Proctor, who 70 years ago ascribed the origin of the so-called Jovian family of comets, comprising the majority of comets of short periods, to eruptions from Jupiter. The gases of Jupiter and Saturn are in violent motion despite their low temperatures, yet the velocity necessary for escape from the major planets is so great, 60 kilometers per second from Jupiter, that Veskenviatsky admits not knowing the mechanism that could, in conditions presently prevailing on major planets, impart this velocity to the exploded matter. Nevertheless, Velikovsky insists that in the recent past, conditions on these planets must have been such that this was possible, even if these conditions cannot be defined. He emphasizes that by casting off the exploded matter, planets must have changed their own masses and consequently their orbits. They must also have experienced recoils. That's what I thought. Shedding matter while they're moving away. Yes, that would be acclimating their charge, wouldn't it? In the publications of the Kiev Observatory for 1953, Velikovsky says, "The history of the planetary system was characterized, we assume, by definitely more rapid changes and more active physical processes than appeared when only gravitational interrelations in the solar system were taken into account. All this is in complete harmony with the conclusions at which I arrived in Worlds in Collision. Concerning the time, a few thousand years ago, of the birth of comets of short periods and their origin by eruption from the planets, especially the major planets. There I also explained the forces or conditions that caused the major planets to eject the cometary masses. The near collision between major planets brought about the birth of comets. Now my claim, based on historical material, that the composition of the solar system was changed in historical times, is given the support of observation and calculation. The electromagnetic nature of the universe, deduced in Worlds in Collision from a series of historical phenomena, is supported by another series of recent observations. At Evans Signal Laboratory of the United States Army Signal Corps in Belmar, New Jersey, researchers conducting pioneer experiments on the reception of radar echoes from the moon detected noises coming from the sun. These noises point to discharges of strong potentials. In the fall of 1947, at the meeting of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, Sir Edmund Appleton reported that radio noises coming from the sun coincide with solar flares. According to him, a sunspot is the most powerful ultra-short-wave radio station known, its power being much greater than 1,000,000 kilowatts. In 1948 and 49, Donald Menzel produced motion pictures of prominences or explosions of matter on the sun. They were made at the Solar Observatory in Climax, Colorado. What a name. The exposed matter rose at a very great speed to immense heights, all the time gaining in velocity, and then descended to the sun, not on a curved path as a missile would do, but by retreating on the path it covered, comparable to a missile reversing its direction and returning to its point of departure. Moreover, the velocity of its descent was without the acceleration expected in a fall, and this, too, was in violation of gravitational mechanics. It has been observed that when protuberances or surges of exploded matter on the sun run into one another, both of them recoil violently. Such observation was made by McMath and Sawyer, and on another occasion by Lyot. The conclusion drawn by E. Pettit of the Mount Wilson Observatory in 1951 is that solar protuberances are electrically charged. Above the protuberances, the coronal structure is often bent into the form of an arch, sometimes into several concentric arches. This is additional evidence of the electrical nature of the protuberances and corona. In the configuration of the cometary nuclei and tails, there was found good evidence that all particles in the comet influence the motion of each other, and in the configuration of the streamers in the tails of many comets strongly indicate a mutual repulsion. Thus wrote Professor N.T. Rabrevinnikov, director of the Perkins Observatory, 1951, it is also calculated that the repulsion of the tails of the comets by the Sun is 20,000 times stronger than the gravitational attraction. And the implication is that it cannot be caused by the pressure of light, as previously thought, and that electrical repulsion must be in action. From spectral analysis, it is known that the cometary tails do not shine merely by reflected light, and that their light is not caused by combustion either, but most probably is an electrical effect comparable to the effect of a Geissler tube. In order to explain the general magnetic field of the terrestrial globe, Dr. E.C. Bullard of Great Britain's National Physical Laboratory assumed electrical currents in the liquid metal core of the Earth. The polar lights have been explained by various scientists as electrical charges arriving from the Sun. Following disturbances on the Sun, there is an immediate disturbance in the ionosphere and radio transmission, ground currents, and the magnetic field of the Earth. There is also a second retarded but pronounced reaction about 25 hours later, and auroral displays. In 1948, Enrico Fermi explained the electromagnetically high charges of the cosmic rays as a result of the positive particles having traveled through magnetic fields in space. In 1951, Richmeyer and Teller followed an earlier idea of Swan, explained these charges as originating from the Sun. Protons and heavy nuclei could be accelerated to the enormous velocity of cosmic ray particles by an extended magnetic field of solar origin. Both theories assume the existence of magnetic fields in space. I could add to this that if the Earth is a negatively charged body, the great energy with which positive charges, the cosmic rays, rush toward the Earth is not in the least enigmatic. Holy crap. Kind of gives pause for those microbursts that one guy talks about. I mean, the Sun could probably sneeze half an Earth and send it our way, and it would immediately bury whatever it landed on. And maybe that's the reason oceans become mountains and mountains become oceans. Come to think of it, that's a scary thought. It would just be a matter of time. I hope those are giant spaceships shooting whatever comes out of the Sun. And you got all these billionaires talking about getting off planet. See, what do they know that we don't? Well, maybe concepts for living in balance. The admonitions of Mott. Concepts of living in balance. I guess when they die, they're supposed to be able to say this. And they get weighed, with the feather. And if they're lying, they get eaten up by that creature. But I just wanted to read them and see how. There's quite a few of them, so let's read them. I have not committed sin. I have not committed robbery with violence. I have not stolen. I have not slain men and women. I have not stolen food. I have not swindled offerings. I have not stolen from God. I have not told lies. I have not carried away food. I have not cursed. I have not closed my ears to truth. Interesting. I have not committed adultery. I have not made anyone cry. I have not felt sorrow without reason. I guess that's not a good thing. It's kind of a sin to be sad without a reason. I would think that would be like someone who's depressed. That's interesting. I remember hearing something too, where Saturn punishes the melancholic. Yeah, I guess it wouldn't be a good thing, would it? I don't remember ever being sad without cause. I have not committed... I read that. All right. I have not assaulted anyone. I am not deceitful. I have not stolen anyone's land. I have not been an eavesdropper. I have not falsely accused anyone. I have not been angry without reason. I have not seduced anyone's wife. I have not polluted myself. Interesting. I have not terrorized anyone. I have not disobeyed the law. I have not been excessively angry. I have not cursed God. I have not behaved with violence. I have not caused disruption of peace. I have not acted hastily or without thought. I have not overstepped my boundaries of concern. I have not exaggerated my words when speaking. I have not worked evil. I have not used evil thoughts, words, or deeds. I have not polluted the water. I have not spoken angrily or arrogantly. I have not cursed anyone in thought, word, or deed. I have not placed myself on a pedestal. I have not stolen that which belongs to God. I have not stolen from or disrespected the deceased. I have not taken food from a child. I have not acted with insolence. I have not destroyed property belonging to God. 42. Yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. The virtues of Mott. Yeah, we already read that, but I'll read it again. Control of thoughts, control of actions, devotion to purpose, have a faith in the ability of your teacher to teach you the truth, have faith in yourself to assimilate the truth, to assimilate the truth, have faith in themselves to wield truth, be free from resentment under the experience of persecution, be free from resentment under the experience of wrong, cultivate the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, and cultivate the ability to distinguish between real and unreal. Truth is like lightning. Its errand is done before you hear the thunder. Gerald Massey. Principles of Mott. There they are. I read them already once. And then here's the admonitions of Mott. 1895 and 1950. The time was ripe for a heresy. 180 years ago, in 1773, Pierre-Simon de Laplace, 1749 to 1827, then 23 years old, stood before the Académie des Sciences in Paris and read a paper in which he proved the stability of the solar system. All deflections of the planets from their paths are only periodic oscillations from their mean courses, and the celestial mechanism is wound up to go on forever. Laplace's contemporary, Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, 1744 to 1829, set out to demonstrate in a series of works that this Earth has ever been a peaceful abode of evolution, free from spasmodic disturbances, in opposition to the dominant ways of his day. These ideas of harmony or stability in the celestial and terrestrial spheres gained ground in the 19th century and became the foundation of scientific thought. In 1846, Leverrier, by announcing the existence of the planet Neptune, which was immediately thereafter discovered in the part of the sky indicated by him, proved the gravitational theory of Newton and the orderly universe of Laplace to be correct. However, in the same year, by detecting the anomaly in the revolution of Mercury, always accumulating in one and the same direction, he threw the first doubt on the infallibility of these very laws. The theory of uniformity, as understood by Lamarck and Hutton, was developed by Lyell, became the cornerstone of Darwinian theory, and Darwin went so far as to say that anybody who was unconvinced by Lyell's teaching should refrain from reading The Origin of Species. The principle of uniformity, or the explanation of all past events in the history of the globe, and in terms of the processes in action in our own age, or the denial of catastrophic crisis in the past, gave Darwin what he needed most for his idea of the origin of species: almost unlimited time, in order that from the struggle for existence or competition, new forms should evolve, and that an animal like
the spider with its many legs, and human beings should have had a common ancestor. Untold eons were necessary. By the end of the 19th century, the war between the theory of evolution and the theory of creation in 6 days, less than 6,000 years ago, was concluded with victory to the theory of evolution. The difficulty left was, in the view of Thomas Huxley, that no really new species had appeared on the world scene since the scientific observations were made. Not even the breeding experiments. The breeding experiments, just what would that be about?
Very interesting.
The geological record, however, spoke unequivocally of the fact, in the past, lived animal forms that do not live any longer. And of those forms that live in our age, many were not present in the geological past. Laplace's theory of the origin of the solar system, of a rotating nebula, was replaced by the end of the century with a theory of a catastrophic beginning in a near collision of the Sun with another star, with debris forming the planets. Isn't that interesting? And what star was that other star? And where did that information come from? I'd like to know. But it was stressed by the authors of this new theory that the universe is orderly, and this beginning in a cataclysm was an unusually rare occurrence in the cosmos, and that the solar system is governed by the principle of stability, as enunciated by Laplace, and the Earth by a law of uniformity, and the animals and plants by the law of evolution through continuity. It appeared that basic principles having been established, science had before it only the work of refinement and observation, and in the addition of details for perfection of knowledge. But the time of basic discoveries was over. This was the outlook in 1895. In April of that year,
Fridtjof Nansen,
in an attempt to discover the North Pole, reached a point less than 4 degrees from it. The scientific world looked upon the discovery of the North Pole as the most coveted goal still left to be attained by science. But before Nansen, drifting from latitude 8614, reached his home in Norway, the scene changed. Conrad Röntgen of Würzburg discovered the X-rays, or cathode rays, that pass through opaque bodies, discovering all kinds of things. In the same year of 1895, 20-year-old Marconi, working at the home of his father near Bologna, made the first successful experiment with wireless transmission. Okay, now I have read that he ripped off Tesla when he was his understudy, and that Bologna was notorious for having self-important
Tricksters and evildoers.
intellectuals there that were made fun of by a comedy troupe, and that's where the saying, "you're full of baloney," came from. That year, too, Sigmund Freud published his first paper, together with Joseph Breuer, which led to a new understanding of the realm known as the subconscious. And at the same time, Pavlov made his contribution to the psychology of the reflexes. Pavlov's dog. The next year, and still before Nansen had landed on the Norwegian coast, Henry Becquerel, working on uranium, discovered the phenomena of radioactivity. 2 years later, he was followed by the Curies, who discovered radium. In 1897, J.J. Thomson announced that the atom is divisible and is actually a microcosm. And he was followed by Rutherford. In 1900, Planck presented the theory of quanta, or energies dispatched in bundles or shots, and not in a continuous stream. And in the field of origin of species, in 1900, Van Vries announced mutations in plants, observed for the first time, a process of spontaneous changes in living nature fundamentally different from the process of evolution through continuity as postulated by Darwin. Thus, in a few years, in a spectacular series of discoveries, the entire world, matter and energy, and living species, and the human soul opened new horizons, and everything appeared to be incessant vibration,
collisions and transformation, the macrocosm, the microcosm, and even the subtle world of the mind, all alike.
That's interesting.
It's just like that today. And in 1905, Albert Einstein, then 26 years old, offered his understanding of the physical world. An understanding that required a new mental approach, or so it was thought, and single-handedly set science back 150 years.
I've heard it said before that just prior to World War I, there was a major wake-up going on. That kind of makes you think about, World War I ruined everything. When it was over, and after the Spanish flu killed another 50 million people, Salvador Dali and Einstein emerged. How about that?
As a testimonial that the age of basic discoveries had not ended with the victory of Darwin over the book of Genesis, in their minds. Since then, another 50 years have passed, once more, as before the end of the 19th century. We are told that the fundamentals are all known. The age of basic discoveries is definitely terminated, this time for certain, and present and future generations will have to satisfy themselves with detecting details, accumulating data, and adding decimals. And though the exciting decade of 1895 to 1905 threw light on processes in matter, life, and soul, processes that are certainly not inert and are marked by spontaneity and conflict, science in its various branches adjusted the new discoveries and ideas to the framework of the old great principle reigning equally in lifeless and living nature, the law of harmony and unperturbed stability. The time was ripe for heresy. In 1950, a book, Worlds in Collision, created an outburst of emotions almost unprecedented in science. I came upon the idea that traditions and legends and memories of generic origin can be treated in the same way in which we treat psychoanalysis. The early memories of a single individual. I spent 10 years on this work. I found that the collective memory of humankind spoke of a series of global catastrophes that occurred in historical times. I believe that I could even identify the exact times and the very agents of the great upheavals of the more recent past. The conclusions at which I arrived compelled me to cross the frontiers into various fields of science, archaeology, geology, and astronomy. The result was a book, a prolegomena. In its concluding pages, I conceded that more problems were raised than had been solved, and I promised always reckoning with the limitations of the individual scholar.
Ouch.
To pursue my study into these fields too, but already the implications of the fact of great global catastrophes on the Earth, one of the celestial bodies in a time so recent, had caused my critics to assert, in the words of a Harvard astronomer, that here was most amazing example of a shattering of accepted concepts on record. In the heat of the debate, in the press of the book, was pronounced one of the most significant books written since the invention of printing, and also the worst book since the invention of movable characters. Believing that an emotional atmosphere is not well suited to fruitful debate.
Fascinating.
I have entered only infrequently into the controversy. I have made short factual corrections of statements by the Royal Astronomer and by J.S. Haldane, appearing in their reviews of my book, and I participated in a debate with your professor of astronomy, J.Q. Stewart, in the pages of Harper's Magazine, June 1951. I appeared before the American Philosophical Society, which, at its annual meeting in April 1952, held a symposium on some orthodoxies of modern science. My unorthodoxy being the chief subject on the agenda. Otherwise, I have kept myself out of the verbal conflict. Now, more than 3.5 years have passed since the publication of the book, and I appreciate the opportunity offered me by your invitation to present a dispassionate review of recent finds in the 3 fields named in the title of my address. Worlds in Collision,
and recent finds in archaeology. In my book, I describe the great natural catastrophes of the second and first millennia. Before the present era, prominence is given to the description of the natural upheaval that occurred in the closing hours of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt. I synchronized this event with the Exodus, when sea, land, and sky were in uproar. The collective human memory retained an inexhaustible array of recollections of the time when the world was in conflagration, when sea engulfed land, earth trembled, celestial bodies were disturbed in their motion, the meteorites fell. My narrative is based on historical texts of many peoples around the globe, on classical literature, on epics of northern races, on sacred books of the Orient and Occident, on traditions and folklore of primitive people. The question that arose was, where's the archaeological evidence? In later chapters of my book, I gave such evidence. Water clocks and sundials that show a different length of the day, or altered latitudes, change in orientation of ancient temples, which originally faced toward the east, but do so no longer. I also closely examined in my book the calendars of the civilized peoples of antiquity, from Mexico and Peru to Greece, Iran, Israel, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, India, and China, and the calendar reforms that were made. All this material gave strong support to the literary evidence. Working independently of me, Professor Claude Schaefer, whose earlier excavations at Ras Shamara, Ugarit, caused a complete revolution in biblical exegesis, published a volume, Stratigraphiae Comparii et Chronologo, G.D. Lycée Occidental, printed by Oxford University Press. In this very detailed and technical work, comprising together with tables almost 1,000 pages, Schaefer demonstrates that on several occasions, each marking the end of an epoch, the entire ancient East was shaken and devastated. Modern annals of seismology know nothing comparable in severity and extent. The most devastating of these upheavals took place at exactly the end of the Middle Kingdom in Egypt, causing its downfall, as claimed in Worlds in Collision and Ages in Chaos. Cities were overturned. Epidemics left the dead piled in common graves. We came back to John Cook's Saturn Cosmology. When I read that by him, or essay, chapter, I was intrigued by these highlights of new findings that were just beneath it. One of the reasons why I think John Cook is worth listening, I'll just have to take that into consideration. I checked and verified many theories which had been proposed by others about the past. Below I have listed new findings which come out of the attempt to establish a chronology and develop a rational set of mechanics for planetary interactions. Many of these findings have remained unknown or obscured to other investigators. Other items listed below are well established, but tend to be avoided or negated by researchers of the catastrophic past. I guess John didn't know about the equilibrium problem with the atmosphere. I am offering this list for those who are familiar with the major elements of the catastrophic literature of Immanuel Velikovsky and David Talbot. If this is all new to you, skip the rest of this page and proceed to the next chapter. Let's say it's not new to us, so I think we can handle it. Okay, he's got little bullet points, so no numbers. Okay, the first one. The Earth never turned over, at least not completely, and certainly not permanently. This had been suggested by Velikovsky and others, but is a nearly impossible notion. I dispute this and discuss the origins of these ideas in the appendix, Polar Relocations Disputed. I kind of like that. I don't really care for the thought of flipping over. Okay, next one. The age of the Earth, Mars, and the Moon are exactly what they seem to be from the most abundant earliest rocks. The ages do not need to be expanded to fit a theory, in this case I'd say shortened, of the single creation of the whole solar system, as popular science has done. Details in Appendix A. Well, okay.
Let's keep moving from that one. One of the best things about Saturn theory is it doesn't really have a time that it has to fit. Evolution does. That's why gradualism, they need it. Solar system, as popular science has done. Details in Appendix A. Okay. Saturn probably first entered the solar system before the Cambrian explosion. The sudden development of new phyla and species could be attributed to a nova event and a mass expulsion of Saturn at that time. 4. The mass extinctions and the speciation events which follow these can be attributed to plasma discharges of Saturn as its orbit repeatedly at regular intervals brought Saturn to an intersection with the solar system. The excursion through the solar system would extend over about 15,000 years. This is discussed in Chapter Nevada Conference. 5. Permian extinction is the second to last nova event of Saturn and occurred at a time when Earth was still on an equatorial orbit about Saturn. It did little to advance life on Earth, taking it backward by 100 million years. But Earth became a solar system planet after the end of the Permian. The plant forms of Earth testify to the two distinct environments. The glaciation dated 30 million years ago, and the intermittent glaciation since 3 million years ago, which can be blamed on electric plasma contacts by Saturn, follow the 27 million year repeating pattern. The rise of hominids in the last 3 million years is discussed. The last intermittent glaciations might testify to a series of recent interactions between Earth and Saturn. The mention in many creation myths of a period of darkness preceding creation can be dated to the early Neolithic or Upper Paleolithic and is likely the result of nanometer dust particles in the stratosphere after a massive compressive force and lightning strikes by Saturn in North America in 10,900 BC. Yeah, they were like 5 miles wide.
That would be your shredded animals and trees from Earth in upheaval, wouldn't it? Massive strikes of mega lightning would tend to do that, wouldn't it?
This caused the worldwide period of extreme cold, drought, and darkness, recognized today as the Younger Dryas period. For more on this, see the chapters Tunguska and Chicxulub. Let's see how close I got.
Chicxulub.
How about that? And the Younger Dryas, with additional Mesoamerican retellings in the chapters the Chilumbalam and the Popol Vuh. The Cataclysm is addressed in papers by Richard Firestone in 2001, Mammoth Trumpet Magazine, and in 2007, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. You know, some guys, I'm not saying John Cook's one of them, but some folks think that if they pander to mainstream a little bit in their theory, that they'll get more accepted because they pandered a little bit. Like they're trying to get brownie points or something. I don't know. But sometimes it seems like some researchers try to do that, to like give them some cred so that they'll give the researchers some cred. I feel like certain people like Graham Hancock do that.
It really irked me when Hancock started citing professors at Cambridge and Oxford for their research when his whole life he was supposed to be this renegade. Now either he's an academic and he's always been one, or he's pandering for votes, if you will. Now he wants to be recognized by mainstream, it seems. And that just isn't going to happen. But I think that a lot of his methods are a little unsound for an independent researcher. I mean, there is no way on Earth that Hancock never heard of Velikovsky or didn't know of him. And for him to just shoo him away by saying, oh, well, he had some theories in the 50s. He was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, all the way up until the day he died. So that's not right either. And since his main gist is man as a species with amnesia, I take exception with him. It shows me he's disingenuous.
I think he sincerely believes this. Back to the reading before I start babbling. The cloud swirling skies, which are found at the start of most creation myths, are the result of Earth falling into a subpolar orbit with Saturn, then entering the lower part of the coma of Saturn. See the chapter, The Event of the Younger Dryas, for a narrative and consideration of the dynamics. This also coincided with the start of the hypothermal period. Hypsothermal period in 9500 BC, for which see the chapter A. Timeline. While traveling through the lower plasma formations of Saturn's coma, the Earth 3 times experienced the formation of 3 ball plasmoids, 150,000 to 400,000 miles, 240,000 to 644,000 kilometers, below the South Pole. The lines of electrons connecting these and running past Earth to an object in the north skies. This started in 10,900 BC and ended in 8347 BC. Now, where did those plasmoids come from anyway? Did they just form? There was so much electricity in space that they just formed, or did they come from a body?
What I'm thinking is it's probably from Birkeland currents that are running along with the planets. That's probably what forms them. I look at them almost as a planet that failed, but it still has the charge of an entire planet. That's why these things are so monstrous. 10 to the 18th amps, around that neighborhood. Got to write that down. That's definitely a question for Wall.
The petroglyphs of this condition were investigated by a team led by Anthony Peratt and published in 2003 and 2007 in the IEEE Transactions on Plasma Science. The dates above are from my findings. The ubiquitous female figurines found in millions on millions worldwide, dating from the Upper Paleolithic and the Neolithic, are representations of Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Mercury, and Mars, as seen together in the skies, on the ecliptic, enclosed in a coma, discussed in the chapter A Timeline and Gimbutas. The one thing I like about Test's theory is the one red dwarf and 2 brown dwarfs coming in together, and really no planet orbiting either star. It was almost just like they were floating there, and you could see all 3 stars in the sky. I mean, that's something that really intrigues me.
John has even speculated, and I think he will later in his story, that the Earth at one time had its own plasma sheath and had no star. It's coming, I think. I wouldn't be surprised if it comes down to the biggest body in the solar system getting the nod to be the star, because it draws the most electricity to it.
The flood in 3147 BC is correctly identified in the mythology of Sumerian and Bible sources. Although shifted to a narrative of 2349 BC, it can be assumed that Jupiter, at that time closer to the Sun, passed Saturn and its planets on the inside of Saturn's orbit. The current orbital inclinations of the outer planets matches the expected vertical separations of the planets in 3147 BC, discussed in Appendix B. Damn, I mean, how could he figure that out? How would he even know? I wish you would expand a little bit on the expected vertical separations. So what does that mean? Okay, vertical separations, that means not the horizontal, but the vertical, so whether they're above and below each other, right?
Yes, of course. It means the planets, the polar configuration, vertical separation. I get it, okay. All right.
I wish you expand on that. The palette of Narmer depicts Venus, Mars, and Uranus, where the pharaoh figure is Horus, Mars, and dressed as Saturn. Not some battle of unification for prehistoric Egypt. And with Mercury as the sandal bearer of the pharaoh. See Appendix, the palette of Narmer. I'm going to have to look that up and see what it is. Palette of Narmer. I'm going to write that down. Let's copy and paste it. Find out what it is. Look it up. We'll call this show
Studying with Greg. Man, I'm going to get martyr. Heesh.
Not even halfway through. Oh my goodness. I lost my place. All right. The cloud-swirling skies, which are found at the start of most creation myths, are the result of Earth falling into a subpolar orbit with Saturn and entering the lower part of the coma of Saturn. See the chapter, The Event of the Younger Dryas, for a narrative and a consideration of the dynamics. This also coincided with the start of the hypsothermal period, 9500 BC.
Oh, I already read that. Dope.
All right. Okay, I'm here. Okay. The bee and the sedge, as in he of the bee and the sedge, is the pharaoh as Saturn, with Venus as the bee and Uranus as the sedge. See the chapters, The Creation and the Start of Time. I see. So this is kind of just a little tease. For the expansion, you got to go read the chapter. Aha. Well, that makes total sense. Yeah, because if I look these up and get a mainstream definition, it's not going to really mean much, is it? The creation and the start of time. Maybe I should read one of those. The raven and dove let out by Noah to test the waters can be identified as the planets Uranus and Venus. Well, he's mentioned Uranus a lot. As seen from Earth directly from after 3147 BC. The Mesopotamian flood myths identify the same planets and adds a swallow, which is likely the moon, but might be the later Mercury. That's kind of taking a leap. I don't know. Well, it's better than literal, I suppose. Very interesting. The report in the Bible and in Mesopotamian legends, and hundreds of additional flood legends, of a ship landing on a mountain after the flood is the backlit crescent of Jupiter on top of a massive outpouring of plasma from the south pole of Jupiter. In Egypt, as in some Mesopotamian retellings of this event, this is also understood as an approaching celestial bull, which destroyed the city of the gods. The orbits of the inner planets have changed only minimally since 3147 BC. Most changes involve an epicidal rotation of the second nodule point. It happens all the time. I'll have to find out what the second nodule point is. Planets have to line up exactly with the sun to result in an electric field interaction of their plasmasphere. Okay. The biannual sightings of Mars passing close to Earth between 3070 BC and 2750 BC are recorded as events in the dynastic records of the Palermo stone of Egypt. Take a look at the Palermo stone. The few interactions with Venus, which have been presented as collisions by others, occurred at distances of 10 to 12 million miles, 16 to 19 million kilometers, 17 to 20 million miles. Electric interactions with Mars occurred at much closer distances, as Mars slipped by Earth, and probably no closer than 40,000 miles. Details in various chapters in Appendix B. You know how lucky Earth is to be the third planet instead of the fourth? Man, because Mars could have easily been here. It must have a strong magnetic field or something, because they're supposed to be repelling each other, but I don't understand why the sun would repel Mars further away than the Earth. The orbit of the Earth enlarged 4 times. The orbit of the Earth enlarged 4 times since 3147 BC. In 2349 BC, 2193 BC, 1492 BC, and 747 BC. See Appendix B, Celestial Mechanics. Each time the Earth reached a different location from the Sun, it needed to adjust its charge level, and plumes of plasma extended up from the magnetic poles, perhaps lasting for years. Both the north and south plumes extending up some 10 to 20 Earth diameters, were seen throughout the world. The ends moved with the rotation of the magnetosphere, making them look like they were waving in the wind. The people of Mesoamerica called them trees, with the birds sitting on top. Egypt called them braziers, releasing plumes of smoke in the Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia called the east and west plume flags or banners, and recorded them in seals and sculpture. Mesoamerica, in 2 instances, provides a count of how many times this happened. The plumes were detected by NASA in a dark mode plasma in 2009, a year after I had added them to my text. Yeah, but those plumes don't have anything to do with the age of the Earth. When Jupiter entered the asteroid belt, the mountain form of the lower plasma disappeared. Instead of the plasma from Jupiter's south pole extended directly left and right to the asteroids and curved up further away. Jupiter has a reversed magnetic field. These are the ram's horns of Amun-Ra. The form is called the Shin in Egypt, a circle on a flat line, and is depicted as a boat almost everywhere in antiquity. See chapter Career of Jupiter. Jupiter's coma tripled in size in about 2527 BC as it left the asteroid belt, but lost its coma again by 2438 BC. The coma returned in 2349 BC, the flood of Noah, but eventually reduced to the visible size of the moon. In 2150 BC, Jupiter caught on fire and burned up a substantial amount of its atmosphere. When this extinguished, Jupiter reduced in size to that of a star. Jupiter reduced in size to that of a star? What was it before that? It's a little strange. Maybe it's a typo. I don't think a planet could be bigger than a star. Well, that'll do it for me today. I just wanted to get some of this to you. And I'm going to be back and I'll do some more reading later. All right, take care.
Good night.
Chapter 4. Ice.